blood-stained cuckoo clock ticks in a dim red room. A wooden bird emerges and calls twice. A bloodied woman's face appears, followed by a voice answering that it's him. A young man stands with his back turned as the time is marked at 7 p.m. Korean time. In a trashed apartment filled with bottles and a bloodied blade, his kneeling target lies eliminated while a silhouette waits in the doorway behind him. Inside a hidden storage locker, rows of packaged goods fill steel shelves. A voice asks whether Korea caused any trouble during the job. Beside a school emblem, a nameplate reads Ryu Kang. He explains that becoming an official student has brought its own problems, with his biggest complaint being that he can no longer buy cigarettes. Standing against a burning sunset with a cigarette between his lips, he admits that nicotine withdrawal makes him feel like he's sucking on a pacifier. Among commuters at a crosswalk in his school uniform, he reflects that if he'd known this life was waiting for him, he should have packed his suitcase properly before returning. As he waits for the signal, he remembers how even elementary school kids once ran errands for their fathers, buying alcohol and cigarettes, and wonders whether Korea's old hospitality disappeared after becoming a developed country. Lying flat on the crosswalk in exaggerated defeat, he reflects that the entire country has become unrecognizable in only 10 years. Walking beneath a needle-thin skyscraper, he marvels at how futuristic the city looked. Luxury cars fill the streets, seemingly everywhere he looked. A red supercar stops nearby, and a woman steps out, catching his attention. Dressed sharply and carrying coffee and her phone, she walks past as he silently takes in how much the living standards surrounding and even people's mannerisms have changed. With the skyline behind him, he continues thinking about how different everything is from the last time he lived here. His eyes briefly drop to the woman's figure before he catches himself, noticing that there was nothing this big before. She stops beside a massive duck sculpture to take a photo. He stares at it in disbelief as cherry blossoms drift along the riverside around the floating giant duck. Despite all the changes, he decides the cherry blossoms remain exactly the same. The sight brings back a memory. A young boy runs along a blossom-covered path, calling for his mother and asking if she has seen the duck. His father takes his hand and mentions that he has already reserved dinner for duck soup, knowing exactly what his son would ask. An older Kang man watches the family walking ahead as petals drift through the park. The boy rides on his father's shoulders and excitedly claims popcorn is falling from the trees, but his mother gently explains that they are cherry blossom. As the boy chews on something, she affectionately calls him her sweet boy and suggests going to the theater for real popcorn, asking what movie he wants to watch. A petal lands nearby, drawing a quiet reaction from the man watching them. The memory shifts again as the boy happily says his dad wants to watch the movie too, prompting his mother to call out to her husband. The scene returns to Ryu Kang-min walking alone beneath the blossoms in his school uniform. His expression remains unreadable as he takes in the place his family once enjoyed together. A sharp beep breaks the moment. His attention snaps back, and he irritably grips his jacket collar. Frustrated that he can't even have a moment with his memory, he pulls out a compact tracking device displaying a glowing green location and coordinate. After studying it, he decides it's time to work, his gaze becoming focused. Under a fiery sunset, a small shop's sign glows above the rooftop. He looks around with quiet surprise at how abruptly the scenery has changed. Outside a rundown supermarket, he notes that the address has led him all the way up there. Reading the sign, he dryly remarks that calling it a supermarket is generous, and decides that this finally looks like somewhere ordinary people actually live. When nobody answers, he chooses to wait. As he wanders inside, he browses the cigarette shelf and considers taking one for himself. Meanwhile, an older shopkeeper crouches among the stock and suspiciously questions whether a student should even be smoking. When the shopkeeper rises to greet him, Kang-min smoothly claims that he's only running an errand for his father. He produces a sleek black card and places it on the counter, presenting it as his father's card. He then asks the shopkeeper to put the payment on a 36-month installment plan. The shopkeeper turns away unimpressed, muttering that he's a paying customer too, before briefly apologizing for brushing him off. Holding up a snack, Kang-min explains that after watching countless Korean dramas while living abroad, he mistook the shopkeeper for one of those familiar drama characters, which is why his expression caught him off guard. The shopkeeper dismisses the idea and mentions that he also recently returned from working overseas. Both men remark on the strange coincidence of meeting like this, and Kang-min agrees with a thin smile, his eyes sharpening beneath his hair. A framed family photo rests beside a knife and fruit on the counter. The shopkeeper reveals that Kang-min once worked in the same line of business as him. Kang-min begins to identify himself as a contract killer, but the shopkeeper suddenly grabs his collar and reaches for a box cutter hidden beneath the counter. He recognizes Kang-min as a hired killer from abroad. Kang-min asks if the shopkeeper intends to kill him, genuinely surprised. The shopkeeper praises how quickly he understands the situation before accusing him of betraying the organization, killing its members, and fleeing. He attacks without warning, forcing Kang-min through the narrow aisle. Kang-min counters that he has come to eliminate him and lands a powerful blow. The two crash through the storeroom, sending shelves, bottles, and other items scattering. Amid the wreckage, the shopkeeper notices Kang-min's black card and asks about it. Within the organization, agents receive cards according to their rank, progressing through silver and gold. The black card is different, reserved for the organization's highest-ranking agent. The shopkeeper admits he has never even heard of one existing. Kang-min jokingly accepts the veteran's praise, gesturing that he is flattered to receive such recognition for obtaining a black card at his age. The shopkeeper then asks where his weapon is. Kang-min raises his hands and explains that airport security confiscated it, leaving him essentially empty-handed. The shopkeeper advances with his blade, incredulous that someone of black rank could be so careless. In the darkness, two hands grip improvised weapons as the first rule of assassination is recalled. A weapon. Steel scrapes against steel, and Kang-min's eye widens when a blade suddenly appears beside him. He catches its edge with his bare hand and deflects the attack. The second rule follows. A surprise attack. The shopkeeper suddenly dives at him from above with brutal speed. A streak of light passes Kang-min as he lies pinned to the ground, barely avoiding the strike. Something breaks loose and clatters away while the shopkeeper demands to know why he betrayed the organization. Grabbing Kang-min by the collar, he presses him against the car and demands an explanation. Kang-min quietly points out that someone of his caliber would have had everything to lose by turning against the organization. The shopkeeper continues, asking why someone who benefited so much from it would still betray them. Kang-min's attention shifts to an open tin can on the counter. He repeats the idea of a tin can, explaining that every day inside the organization felt like being trapped in one. As his hand moves toward his hidden blade, the shopkeeper lunges again with claw-like speed. Their weapons collide, sending sparks through the air as they lock into a stalemate. Debris and torn fabric scatter around them. Kang-min dryly acknowledges that the tin can comparison is a fitting metaphor. The shopkeeper sarcastically asks whether Kang-min took a creative writing class at a community center, then reminds him that he already knows the answer to his own question. Their fight erupts again, with both men exchanging rapid strikes in the cramped storeroom. The shopkeeper argues that he was only following the organization's orders, comparing his life to a hunting dog that serves until death and calling it a hellish existence. The battle reaches its most violent point as neither man stops attacking. Kang-min's face darkens beneath his hair, carrying an unspoken weight as he finally begins to answer. The fight continues with fists and blades clashing rapidly, each strike driving them deeper into the wreckage. Kang-min finally admits that he simply wanted to be free. A sudden blow lands heavily, sending one of them reeling backward across the floor. Bloodied and breathing heavily, the shopkeeper insists that Kang-min's freedom must have come at a cost and asks what he lost. A blood-stained collar tag comes into view as Kang-min admits that he lost only one thing: his family. Standing over a photo of his wife and child, Kang-min explains that once the organization discovered his betrayal, they killed everyone he loved. The organization tracks every agent's family and keeps them under constant surveillance, using them as leverage to prevent betrayal. He lunges forward as he explains that they are effectively held hostage, demonstrating the force of his strike with a sack of flour. A violent impact shakes the room as their fight intensifies. Nearby, a photo frame and a plated apple remain undisturbed, while the shopkeeper remarks that even regret cannot undo what has already happened. Another devastating blow sends debris flying. Bloodied, Kang-min bitterly asks whether the shopkeeper means that it is too late for him. He admits that the price of his freedom was his family's lives. The shopkeeper's expression turns almost manic as he calls that price cheap and questions how Kang-min could betray the organization knowing his family would be sacrificed. Standing over the fallen shopkeeper, Kang-min remarks that they all say the same tired, meaningless thing. The scene shifts to a familiar storefront that Kang-min used to visit often. He has known its owner for years. The old shopkeeper stands pale and trembling, sweat running down his face as though he is about to collapse. The man behind him asks if he is all right and suggests closing early so he can rest. The shopkeeper looks at a photo of his wife and two children and explains that resting would mean he could not feed his family. The younger man quietly recognizes him as a truly good and devoted father, working himself to exhaustion for his bedridden wife and children who know nothing of his struggle. In that cramped shop, the man has spent his life sacrificing everything for those he loved. Yet the younger man's expression contradicts his words. Standing over the shopkeeper's lifeless body, he calls him an idiot. Blood gathers around the corpse as his cold eyes settle ahead. When a voice demands to know why he killed him, he explains that watching someone sacrifice everything for his family while pretending to be happy disgusted him. A memory surfaces, questioning whether he too works to protect people he loved. As knives descend from above, He recalls his years surviving as one of the organization's trained killers. A senior figure once stood over him with a cruel smile and offered a simple lesson: family is nothing more than a leash. Among the shelves, Kang-min's expression hardened. Violence erupts around him, sending glass and debris through the air. Fighting through the pain, he resolves that if he must spend his life bound by a leash, he will tear it apart himself. Blades cross above his head as he fights back, refusing to remain trapped by anyone else's idea of love or duty. The senior assassin sneers that he would rather slit his own throat than accept such a leash. He suddenly lunges, blade flashing as he closes the distance. Mocking the situation, he wonders how one is supposed to cut a throat properly, then complains that his blade feels too small. His confidence breaks when something interrupts his movement. Blood drips from a thin blade held steady in a hand as the senior demands to know how it got there. Kang-min calmly asks how he failed to notice. He explains that his opponent should have paid closer attention to where his tools ended up. During the fight, he had repurposed a shard from the broken box cutter, flicking it loose and throwing it with precision. Straightening his tie, Kang-min calmly recalls the third rule of assassination. A weapon should never be thrown carelessly because it can always be used against its owner. Metal clashes as the senior staggers and chokes in disbelief that a simple box cutter fragment managed to draw his blood. Kneeling among the wreckage, he wonders whether Kang-min has been playing with him from the beginning. Kang-min coldly denies it. A shattered photo frame lies between them as the senior asks whether another reason caused Kang-min's betrayal. Kang-min's expression remains unreadable as he explains that he holds nothing personal against him. Blood runs down the senior's throat as he admits that Kang-min's calmness in front of him is unsettling. Kneeling in the spreading pool of blood, the senior assumes Kang-min was sent by the organization to kill him. Kang-min corrects him, explaining that his mission in Korea has nothing to do with him. The senior's eyes widen as he realizes he was never the real target. Kang-min reveals that he was sent to eliminate someone far more significant, important enough to justify risking his own life for the mission. He then calmly asks whether freedom was truly what the senior wanted, suggesting that perhaps this is finally the answer to that wish. Kneeling in the wreckage, the older man finds something close to eternal freedom as his life fades. Nearby, a blood-stained clock continues ticking, its wooden bird chiming as though nothing has changed. Kang-min walks away, muttering that it is finally over. With his shirt stained, he lights a cigarette beneath the fading sunset and considers the senior a decent warm-up for a sub-target. He decides to move on, already heading toward the location of his real objective. From a rooftop overlooking the city, Kang-min studies the skyline concealing his true target. Tugging at his ruined shirt, he concludes that the mission itself will not be difficult, though he will need a new school uniform. Looking down, he thinks that everything will change starting tomorrow. The school grounds spread beneath him, marking the beginning of his contract-killing mission. At Anil High School, morning sunlight fills the classrooms as students sit through class, unaware of the killer who has just joined them. Kang-min tells himself to behave as he always has and blend in with the other students. A girl watches him with quiet curiosity while the teacher continues writing on the chalkboard, unaware of the killer among the class. His classmates greet him casually, with one apologizing for not having his student ID ready yet. This is the moment Kang-min finally locates his target. Smiling, he asks if anyone can spare him a cigarette while calmly deciding that he will eliminate them all. 1 month earlier, the story shifts to a private mansion in the Angelos district belonging to Manuel Santos, a sitting member of the House of Representatives. The estate sits quietly beneath palm trees and pool lights, but Kang-min stands alone in the courtyard with guns pressed against his head from every direction. He dryly notes that a private residence should not have this level of security. Keeping the situation under his control, Kang-min asks Santos whether he would like to walk into his own grave. The man before him is revealed as Manuel Santos, the Angelos district representative. Santos studies him briefly and responds with measured acknowledgement. Kang-min lowers the gun and states his demand: Santos's family must be released before anything else happens. Behind him, a frightened mother shields her crying child and reassures her that everything will be fine. Santos insists that his family has nothing to do with Kang-min's business, but Kang-min repeats his condition: the hostages go free first. To everyone's surprise, Santos immediately agrees and allows the mother and child to leave, leaving his guards confused by how easily he surrendered them. As his family is released, Santos explains his principle that nobody except the intended target should be harmed unless they attack first. Kang-min gives a faint smile and says he follows the same rule without exception. With his family safely out of danger, Santos finally relaxes. Kang-min then orders the surrounding guards to prepare to open fire. Santos studies him and remarks that such concern for others is unusual, adding that Kang-min does not even carry himself like a B-grade contractor. He then reveals why he had remained composed earlier, He feared Kang-min had been sent by Batala itself. The scene cuts to a gleaming tower against the night skyline, the Batala Hotel and Casino. Inside, wealthy dealers and gamblers remain absorbed in high-stakes game. Beneath the ordinary casino's glittering surface, however, something much larger and darker is clearly operating. A dealer stands behind a special table in a golden hall, reserved for contracts ordinary clients cannot request. A man lounges in a throne-like chair, remarking that anyone openly dealing in contract killings must have absolute confidence. The dealer explains that the casino's true business operates beyond the reach of any government. The client acknowledges her reputation as the best in the business, which she confirms without hesitation. When he asks whether she can kill his target, she assures him that she can. Leaning over the table, the dealer explains that the casino employs some of the world's most elite contractors. She spreads a deck of cards across the table and tells the client to choose one, explaining that the card determines the contractor's rank for the job. The client says he already knows and selects a card without hesitation. It is the Ace of Spades. The dealer calls it an excellent choice but warns that the commission for such a rank is extremely expensive. Rows of chips are brought out and stacked before the table, representing more money than expected for a single contract. Holding the Ace of Spades, the client demands that the job begin immediately. Elsewhere, a voice asks where the target is, and reminds the killer never to harm anyone except the intended target. A blood-stained man lights a cigarette in the darkness and confirms that the rule only changes if someone attacks first. Bodies already cover the pavement around him. A woman clings to someone nearby, trembling as her cries break the silence. The killer looks at her and quietly apologizes for her husband's death, then vows that one day he will pay for his sin. Later, in a bright classroom, Kang-min greets his new classmates and casually explains that he does not have his student ID yet. He then asks if anyone has a cigarette. The teacher freezes at the unexpected question and demands to know who he is, accusing him of disregarding the teacher's authority. Kang-min simply identifies himself as the transfer student. Told to introduce himself and take a seat, he complies without protest. Standing before the class, he gives his name as Ryu Kang-min, while his true identity is the contractor known as Spade A. He claims to be from Dajun, concealing his real affiliation with Batala, an organization built entirely around contract killing. His cover is based on the familiar belief that getting into a good college requires studying in Seoul. That excuse allows him to enroll as an ordinary high school student. Seoul stretches out below, calm and orderly, a city so secure that eliminating someone unnoticed is nearly impossible. Elsewhere, a composed girl reflects that her parents believe she is simply a normal student, unaware that she is using the same cover to get close to the target. A tattooed classmate rests his head on his desk, hoping only for a normal, easy school life. Kang-min greets the class again with a faint smile, while privately completing the thought, "Meet them, then eliminate them." Back at the casino, the dealer reveals that the target is South Korean and currently lives in Seoul. Holding his gun, Kang-min repeats the word Korea and notes that there is another problem with the mission. When the dealer asks what he means, he states that they do not even know who the target is. She questions the absurdity of the situation, but Kang-min explains that it is exactly as it sounds. The client provided nothing except the target's name. He asks whether any other personal information was included. The answer is no. The dealer stares in shock at the Batala file, whose details are deliberately left blank. Kang-min studies it and notes that the target has nothing attached to their name except the name itself. His eyes narrow with interest. He explains that he has already conducted his own research, so he does not need information from the client. Standing outside a classroom door, Kang-min identifies it as the target's classroom. The number 17 is displayed on the door, and he leans inside, realizing that this is where the problem begins. Most of the students are already seated beneath the dull morning light, but the desk near the window is completely empty. Kang-min concludes that the target simply is not coming to school. In the hallway, his tone changes as he casually asks two students why they are blocking the way. One has an arm raised against the doorframe and freezes as Kang-min questions whether he really needs to do this. The moment ends with Kang-man kicking him and sending him flying down the hall. The hallway erupts into chaos as a nearby group jokes that the automatic door sensor must be broken because nothing will open. A girl glances toward the commotion with quiet curiosity, her expression somewhere between amused and unreadable. Someone identifies Kang-min as the transfer student while watching him stand alone in the corridor. A group of boys approaches the girl and asks why she is walking around alone. She coolly explains that she has no friends, prompting Kang-min to wonder privately whether he should switch to plan B. Later, on the rooftop overlooking the school grounds, Kang-min takes a slow drag from his cigarette and exhales with a wide, unsettling grin. Crouched among the others, he easily blends into their conversation as they laugh and comment on how effortlessly he smoked. One asks if he really moved from Daejeon, and he simply confirms it. A tattooed young man asks whether Kang-min knows Liang Wan, the reputed top figure in Daejeon. Three classmates stand around him as he faces away, and after a long silence the moment finally moves forward. Kang-min takes another drag and recalls his old friend Sang-won, who made him drink until he could barely stand the night before his transfer. The memory has now become part of the persona he uses as armor. A girl nearby chews on a snack stick and listens with wide eyes. She has heard that Kang-min smashed a karaoke machine that same drunken night and now assumes he must have been important back in Daejeon. Kang-min brushes it off, crouching beside the tattooed boy and describing their connection as nothing more than friendship. The tattooed boy studies him carefully, sensing something dangerous beneath his casual attitude. He then extends his hand with a wide smile and asks to be friends. Kang-min accepts without hesitation, marking the beginning of his first genuine connections in Korea. The group crosses the street together as the setting sun casts an orange glow over their uniform. Kang-man walks at the front with his hands in his coat pockets, unintentionally taking the lead. One of them asks whether he is going straight to the academy. Kang-min answers that the shuttle van is already waiting. Although the others hesitate over what to make of him, Kang-min privately admits that he does not want to go. As the city lights blur behind him, a girl calls out for him to come back alive. Her words stay with him as he steps onto the van. The van drives away, leaving Kang-min alone on the sidewalk as he watches it disappear past the district's glowing signs. His expression hardens as another memory surfaces. Years earlier, inside a dark vehicle, a small voice calls for its mother and then its father, while red taillights glow against the night. A frightened child sits curled against a wall with his arms around his knee, faint marks covering his skin. A hand grabs him roughly and orders him onto the boat. The boy has no choice but to obey. He later sits trembling inside a dim, swaying compartment, staring blankly ahead as metal clatters around him. Shadowed figures stand over him, with one announcing that they are taking the child to Angelo's. The boy remains silent as the figures loom closer. Back in the present, Kang-min lowers his head under the weight of the memory. He wonders how different everything might have been if that day had never happened. He also questions whether the life he lives now can ever become real or will always remain a cover hiding his true identity. A girl walking beside him stumbles slightly and laughs it off, blaming an uneven brick. Someone asks who she is, and she reminds them that they already introduced themselves earlier. Two voices answer together, Cholman and Han, connecting the names to the people now walking beside him. After school, Kang-min plans to go straight home, exhausted from surviving his first day. His female classmate stops him and casually asks whether he wants to relax instead of spending the evening alone. After hearing his answer, she confidently suggests another way to unwind. Curious about the invitation, Kang-min follows without questioning her intention. Inside her apartment, he looks around with genuine interest. The warm lighting makes the unfamiliar place surprisingly comfortable. Sitting on the bed, he comments on how soft the mattress is while she watches his reaction with amusement. She continues, showing him what she has prepared. A large television and game console are ready for entertainment, while the kitchen shelves are stocked with instant meals, snacks, and drink. She assures him that he will never have to worry about going hungry there. Her increasingly generous hospitality makes Kang-min wonder what she expects in return. The situation suddenly becomes more intimate as she steps closer and asks what he wants to do first. Kang-min remains calm, silently judging the unexpected situation, and realizing that her simple invitation to relax has become much more complicated than expected. Ryu Kang-min suddenly opens his eyes and finds himself pinned to a bed, struggling to understand the bizarre situation. He wonders whether this humiliating scene is what ordinary students call bullying. A girl climbs onto him while several classmates surround the bed, recording the staged incident on their phones. Instead of helping, they laugh and mock him as they enjoy the prank. Kang-min remains completely calm despite becoming the center of their ridicule. While they insult him and laugh at his expression, he quietly studies every person around him. The girl eventually breaks character and admits that the entire performance was an act designed to humiliate the new student. Without raising his voice, Kang-min asks why they are doing this. The room briefly falls silent before the group's tattooed leader steps forward. With a confident smile, he repeats Kang-min's full name, showing that he already knows about the transfer student from Daejeon. He crouches nearby and questions Kang-min about Liang-won, making it clear that the encounter was planned and the bullying was only the beginning. Kang-min casually admits that he knows Liang-won well, recalling how his old friend once forced him to drink heavily before his transfer. His relaxed answer surprises the group, shifting the conversation away from the bullying and toward Liang-won. Kang-min then reveals that Liang-won has never been able to drink because of a medical condition he has had since childhood. The information confuses the student. The leader explains that he has already contacted Liang-won, but the response makes no sense. Liang-won claimed he had never even heard of Ryu Kang-min, making the group suspicious. Convinced that Kang-min is lying, The bullies mock his transfer and suggest that he came to the new school to erase his past and start over. Kang-min calmly raises his hands and begins explaining why he had been looking for cigarettes during class, treating the accusation as a simple misunderstanding. Before he can finish, the blonde student slaps him across the face, making it clear that they have no interest in his explanation. The leader then declares that Kang-min will serve as the class's automatic door from that day forward, forcing him to run errands whenever anyone calls for him. Satisfied with their plan, the group closes in again, expecting another helpless victim. The blonde bully grabs Kang-min's uniform and tries to tear it open, intending to humiliate him further in front of everyone. He pulls with all his strength, expecting Kang-min to panic. Instead, the room suddenly falls silent. The tattooed leader freezes as Kang-min calmly stands before them without the slightest trace of fear. Their confident smiles disappear, replaced by confusion as they realize that something about their newest target is completely different. Kang-min's thoughts return to the assignment that brought him to Korea. Receiving only the target's name is unusual, even for an experienced assassin. Inside Batala's luxurious headquarters, a woman places the mission file before him, but it contains almost none of the information normally required for a contract. After reviewing it, Kang-min immediately rejects the assignment. He refuses to hunt someone whose identity is based only on a common name, pointing out that thousands of people in Korea share it, and accepting the contract could mean killing innocent people by mistake. Korea also reminds him of the family he left behind years ago. Even if he completed the mission, he believed he would eventually have to return to Batala, the organization that had shaped his entire life. His greatest concern was not the mission itself, but the possibility that seeing his family again would awaken emotions strong enough to weaken the discipline he had maintained for years. Caught between his blood relatives and the organization that raised him, Kang-min questions where his true loyalty lies after spending most of his life inside Batala. Before he can refuse again, the organization's representative assures him that he does not need to worry about those concerns because everything has already been arranged. Kang-min realizes the conversation is far from over. The representative explains that this assignment is unlike anything Kang-min has accepted before. Batala is offering a reward worth far more than money or status, with the payment coming directly from the organization itself. If Kang-min succeeds, Batala will grant him permanent freedom and allow him to leave the organization forever. Kang-min loosens his grip on his revolver. The promise sounds almost impossible from an organization that never releases its members. He repeats the word freedom in disbelief and asks for confirmation that completing this one assignment truly means he will never have to return to Batala. Back in the present, the memory returns as Kang-min faces the frightened bullies. If he succeeds, this mission could become the final operation of his life. The students freeze when his torn shirt exposes a body covered in deep scars, each one reflecting countless deadly battles. His expression hardens into a calm smile as the scars remind him why he must survive and complete the assignment. To obtain the freedom he has pursued for years, Kang-min resolves to finish the mission regardless of what stands in his way. He reminds himself of the rule he has never broken as an assassin: only the assigned target can be harmed unless someone attacks first. To get closer to his objective inside the school, he decides to use Plan B. Raising one hand, he silently invites the bullies to attack, refusing to make the first move because breaking his own principle would undermine everything he believes in. The moment they charge, his preparation ends, and years of deadly training take over. His body reacts with flawless speed and precision, counterattacking instantly and dropping several opponents before they understand what happened. Chaos erupts as blood splatters across the floor, leaving the remaining students frozen in disbelief. His display makes it clear that he is far from an ordinary transfer student. Even after defeating them, Kang-min remains calm. He admits that controlling his strength is harder than eliminating enemies, but provoking powerful students is still the fastest way to reach his target. Turning toward the survivors, he calmly calls for the next challenger. Nobody answers. Kang-min adjusts his wrist and prepares himself again, his expression making it clear that he is ready to continue. The room falls silent beneath his intimidating presence. Without breaking his own rules, he has already taken the first step toward reaching the influential figures connected to his true target. 6 years earlier, on Batala's private island, a secluded stretch of untouched shoreline known as Kamatan lies beneath the sun, isolated from the rest of the world and known only to the organization that owns it. On Batala's island, a warning horn stands on a rusted pole facing the sea. 7 minutes have passed since it sounded, while a black flag bearing Batala's symbol flutters along the tree line. The horn counts down the final 3 minutes before the deadline. Deep underwater, Ryu Kang-min sinks into the darkness, chained by his wrists and ankles. A voice from above taunts him, asking whether he plans to become shark food. As a trainee, Kang-min strains against the chains while the pressure closes around him. A label identifies him only as Trainee No. 55% of the Batala training facility, one among countless recruits meant to be broken or discarded. 8 minutes pass. Kang-min desperately works at the chains beneath the surface, his fingers slipping against the metal as his remaining air runs out. His lungs burn, blood vessels strain, and bubbles escape as he fights both panic and instinct. Above him, the ocean remains calm, with waves washing over the empty shore. Then broken chain links begin drifting onto the beach. Kang-min collapses onto the sand, gasping for air, with a small red octopus resting on his wet hair. He jokes that he nearly became a Korean buffet for the fish before staggering toward the black flag. He quietly tells his late grandmother that her grandson is not ready to join her yet. As sweat and seawater run down his face, the click of a gun hammer suddenly freezes him. A tattooed, silver-haired instructor in a red floral shirt stands over him with a pistol aimed at his head. He informs Kang-min that he exceeded the time limit by 1 minute. With the barrel against his temple and the octopus still clinging to his cheek, Kang-min sighs and jokes that he may be joining his grandmother after all. The instructor pulls the trigger. Birds scatter over the palm trees as a feather drifts past the black and gold Batala flag. Kang-min lies sprawled on the ground while the instructor insults him before surprisingly praising his survival instinct. He explains that using whatever is available during a crisis shows a professional mindset, and questions whether Kang-min remained fearless with a gun inches from his eyes as his final act of defiance. Still drenched and exhausted, Kang-min replies that he is not an idiot. He explains that the first shot from a weapon is always a blank to prevent accidental misfires, meaning the round fired at him was never real. The instructor's smile sharpens as he raises the pistol again and warns that from then on every loaded round will be live. Kang-min stares coldly through his hair and asks whether the bullets currently loaded are real. The scene shifts to South Korea, introduced as a peaceful country filled with glowing signs and ordinary street noise. Inside a dim motel room, 5 figures surround an unconscious man on the floor. Unlike Kang-min's former world, these are ordinary high school students who have grown up without violence. They stand tense and uncertain around him. Kang-min slowly raises his hands, reminding himself that killing them without thought is not the right approach. Straightening his torn shirt and exposing the scars across his chest, he decides he needs a plan suited to this situation. One student nervously watches as Kang-min bends down and complains that the buttons on his new uniform have popped off. He assures them that he is not there to take over their territory. One boy raises a glowing fist, sparks flickering from his fingertips as the confrontation turns into a fight both sides are willing to have. His shirt buttons scatter across the floor. Kneeling beside the bed, Kang-min complains that he has only just bought the uniform. Another student charges at him with a fire extinguisher, demanding to know why he cares about his clothes at a time like this. The extinguisher swings down toward him. Kang-min calmly looks up and asks whether the boy has medical insurance. Confused, the student admits that he does not. The extinguisher suddenly shatters mid-swing. Another student stares in shock and asks whether Kang-min destroyed it with his bare hands. Kang-min grabs him by the collar and remarks that he is feeling generous today, his grip firm enough to leave a mark. Kang-min promises the boy a massive payout before snapping something with a movement too fast to follow, leaving everyone stunned by his strength. One final overwhelming strike ends the confrontation instantly, sending the boy crashing down as light bursts from the impact. The scene focuses on those still standing. A woman gasps at the state of the bed as the story confirms that the man before them is Ryu Kang-min, a contract killer living among people who have no idea who he really is. The boy on the bed suddenly jolts upright, shocked to discover that his throat has been pierced, confirming him as a target. The woman recoils at the sight, struggling to process what she is seeing. Kang-min turns to the remaining 2 and explains that he still has one question before he is finished. The girl begs for mercy, insisting that he would never hit a woman. In panic, the other boy suddenly claims that he is also a girl. Ignoring their excuses, Kang-min asks about the friend they usually spend time with, certain that someone else is missing. The scene cuts to a classroom where an empty desk belongs to a student who is held back and rarely attends class. Back in the room, one boy nervously asks whether Kang-min knows where that student is. Kang-min questions why he is looking for him and repeats the question when the boy hesitates. The boy suddenly screams and runs, with his friend stumbling after him. Cornered near the bathroom, he admits that he is terrified because he believes he will be hit, regardless of what he says. A door slams against its frame, leaving cracks in the wood as pale light spills through the opening. Kang-min calmly approaches and assures him that he will not hit him, simply asking him to come closer. When Kang-min turns back toward the room and wonders where the boy went, he notices him standing in the bathroom doorway. Once the door closes behind them, the boy reveals that his panic was an act, and proudly compares his performance to Fear in Flight. He then declares that his dream is to win Best Supporting Actor at the Black Dragon Film Award. Kang-man's expression remains unchanged as he grabs him and pulls hard. The boy proudly claims that he is also talented at acting like himself, but uncertainty quickly replaces his confidence. The confrontation turns into a full action sequence as Kang-min's leg swings toward him. The strike lands with tremendous force, destroying everything nearby and sending debris across the room. Rain pours over the wreckage as the third step of Kang-min's plan gets underway. The boy lies motionless among the debris while the girl grabs her hair and screams in terror. Consumed by panic, she begs to escape and suggests using an electric scooter to create enough distance. Kang-min calmly asks whether going that far is really necessary. Rain soaks his torn shirt as he places a hand against his head and tells them that they only need to answer his question. The girl frantically slaps the boy's back, urging him to hurry because Kang-min is already approaching. Kang-min's hand rests against a door as another memory surfaces. He recalls once being considered a top prospect for a youth national team selection match, with the promise of a huge prize and the glory that came with it. He remembers how close that success had been and clenches his fist, admitting that things might have turned out differently if he had not crushed his opponent's skull during the match. After so long without facing someone truly strong, he admits that he is genuinely excited. A voice suddenly calls his name, Ryu Kang-min. His opponent lunges toward him with a wild grin, demanding that they fight until one of them is completely crushed. Their collision shakes the room, rattling the furniture and knocking objects from the nightstand. In the neighboring room, a boy nervously comments on how intense the noise sounds. His female companion initially asks what he means before realizing he is talking about the room next door. She teases him for merely listening instead of doing something about it. Grinning mischievously, he suggests that the best way to deal with noisy neighbors is to answer with noise of their own. Determined, the boy declares that from then on, they will make enough noise to shake the walls themselves. Back in the other room, another powerful blow sends debris flying as the fight destroys everything around them. The boy recovering nearby reacts to the destruction while the group's leader is eventually crushed against the floor, twitching among the wreckage. With the leader defeated, Kang-min moves to eliminate him. Brushing dust from his hair as he rises, Kang-min dryly remarks that poor construction is a serious problem these days. The girl sees the wreckage and recoils toward the door, cursing under her breath. This is the real reason Kang-min has gone through all these tedious steps. She struggles with the door and demands to know why he is breaking the knob. As Kang-min reaches toward her, she panics, but he calmly explains that the door needs to be pushed rather than pulled. Standing behind her, Kang-min shows an unexpected trace of mercy. She collapses to the floor and begs him not to hit her, insisting that she will do anything to avoid being beaten. Kang-min admits that he never intended to hit her and offers to help instead. Kneeling in front of her, he explains that he only needs a simple favor. Confused, she asks what he wants. Kang-min tells her that among everyone involved there is something only she can do. With his hand resting near her head, she nervously agrees, effectively placing herself in the role of someone who must follow his instruction. He gestures toward the room and explains that she first needs to help him with something involving the held-back student he mentioned earlier, the student no one at school has actually seen. The scene shifts to a run-down building at night, raising the question of what kind of person this missing student really is. Inside, a dim staircase leads downward past barred windows to storage shelves filled with unmarked discs and boxes. A man checks his account balance on his phone and marvels at how much people are willing to pay for the content he sells. During an extravagant meal, he boasts that one particular video has already earned more than the entire previous year's income, allowing them to enjoy expensive food like the sashimi before them. Lounging over the spread, the boss remarks that whether it is seafood or people, freshness is what matters most. Another man comments on how appetizing the meal looked. The boss explains that downloads have increased so dramatically that the site's traffic is nearly overwhelmed. On a phone screen, a stolen recording is listed for sale, with the humiliating video available to anyone willing to pay for it. The boss laughs at the absurdity of people spending real money to watch someone strip on camera, then points to their extravagant meal and credits that video for allowing them to live this well. Pleased with their success, he praises their transformation of the dingy operation into a fortune as a masterpiece. One of his men cautiously warns that if the traffic continues increasing, the police will eventually track them down and suggests moving the office. The boss dismisses the concern. He explains that the video arrived through a messaging app, while the server hosting it is routed overseas, making it difficult to trace. He is equally confident that the office itself is hidden somewhere the police will struggle to find. He boasts that even the director of a federal agency could never locate them there. A sudden knock interrupts him. The knocking continues as the men exchange uneasy looks. The boss holds his chopsticks in midair, sensing that something is wrong. A shadow stands silently behind the barred door. The boss orders one of his men to check it, and the subordinate immediately gets up. When the door opens, a bald man comes face to face with a stranger with bleached blonde hair. The bald man demands to know who he is. The stranger's jacket bears a rabbit emblem holding 2 pistols, and he calmly explains that he has come regarding the place distributing the video. Outside in the rain, the stranger studies the building and quietly wonders whether he has finally found the right location. Back inside, the boss studies the newcomer suspiciously, noting that he does not look like a cop. Surrounded by the gang's men, the blonde stranger is asked which family he belongs to, with the men throwing out names such as the Singyil and Hook gang. Ignoring them, he states his purpose clearly. He wants the video and wants it taken down. One thug laughs at the demand and mocks him, suggesting he worry about lowering his own zipper instead. Another rushes forward, threatening him while confidently claiming he will make him wet himself. Outside the office, 2 bald men continue mocking their target, joking about how long the smell of urine would last if they beat him badly enough. Without warning, blood sprays across the room as one man is struck in the head. His partner freezes in disbelief as the wounded man drops to his knees, clutching his destroyed ear and insisting that the sound could not have been a real gunshot. A gun barrel presses against his skull, leaving no room for denial. The blond man stands calmly in his long coat and fires again, sending the man's body backward. 2 more men rush in but are immediately shot down, collapsing around him while he remains untouched. Smoke curls from his gun as blood streaks his face. He wipes his mouth and calmly orders them to take the recording down immediately. Elsewhere, a suited man sits behind a desk beside an untouched meal, panicking and trying to convince himself that the sound he heard was not a gunshot. Back in the warehouse, a heavily built tattooed man reaches for the blond man's gun and demands that he hand it over, refusing to accept defeat. Despite the blood on his cheek, the blond man remains expressionless and repeats his demand to delete the footage. Still alive and bleeding, the man desperately convinces himself that the weapon must be a modified toy or powerful double B gun. He raises his hands and tries to reassure himself that there is nothing to fear. Realizing he is cornered, he orders the others to attack together, hoping their numbers will overwhelm the stranger. A rabbit emblem appears behind the blond man as his twin guns fire, dropping the final 2 attackers before they can reach him. When the smoke clears, he stands alone among the bodies, calmly lowering his weapon. Kang-min remains at the center of the wreckage, surrounded by the men who tried to stop him. Nearby, a small safe sits untouched, its glowing keypad making it clear that robbery was never his objective. The suited man frantically searches the vault and stuffs cash into a bag, finally accepting that no toy gun could cause damage like this. Panicking, he considers calling the police but decides to take what matters and escape. Kang-min's shadow falls over him from behind, a gun pressed against the back of his head. He repeats his demand that the video be removed and warns the man that refusing will leave him like the bodies scattered across the floor. Shaking, the man asks whether simply deleting the file will be enough. Kang-min orders him to remove the hard drive directly from the reader, leaving it up to him whether he destroys or keeps it afterward. Confused, the man asks why Kang-min is going this far and wonders whether the person Kang-min was supposedly sent to kill somehow hired him instead. Kang-min remains expressionless and asks what he is talking about. A phone lies on the table as the man begins describing the person shown in the recording. The recovered video starts playing, revealing Kang-min's own face and confirming that he is the person captured on camera. Studying the footage, the man quietly remarks that what he is seeing seems unusually small. Kang-min's temper finally snaps. He pushes the gun forward and angrily reminds him that he already said it was small, so there is no reason to repeat it. Night settles over a quiet suburban house, with only an empty bedroom and a desk visible inside. A school locker bears Ryu Kang-min's name beside the Anil High School emblem, his untouched uniform hanging inside. Deep underground, a narrow stairwell leads to a workshop where tools and a name tag reading Hyun-soo sit beside a pair of tweezers. Despite South Korea's strict firearm laws, Hyun-soo calmly assembles a rifle piece by piece. After fitting the bolt into place, he insists it is only a modified toy. Surrounded by pistols, knives, and rifles, he picks one up and calls it another fake, then steadies the scope and admits that this particular weapon is real. Meanwhile, Kang-min crouches on the school playground and asks for a smoke. A bruised classmate hands him a crushed pack, and Kang-min takes a cigarette before having another tattooed student light it for him. Several classmates gather around, while one girl watches quietly. She asks why Kang-min called everyone there. Exhaling smoke, he reminds them that their conversation from the previous day is unfinished. He also points out that they still have one more friend, the returning student from the next class who never attends school. The others exchange nervous looks without answering. The girl's thoughts drift to that same person, bringing back a memory. In the past, she remembers standing among the aftermath of a violent scene before the memory shifts to a shooting range. She runs through the procedure of resetting and clearing a weapon, frustrated by how badly someone had zeroed. When the men behind her ask whether she served in the military, her irritation only grows. Her attention then settles on a stuffed elephant among the shooting range prizes, along with a small pepper plush she wants. A man offers to help her win it, but Hyun-soo steps in and takes the weapon. His profile identifies him as Jang Hyun-soo, 20 years old, a first-year student at Anil High School and a returning student. Hyun-soo fires and immediately impresses everyone with his accuracy despite claiming it is his first time using a gun. He hits target after target until the crowd realizes he is about to achieve a perfect score. His classmates joke that someone with his ability would be an ideal Ministry of Defense recruit. After finishing, Hyun-soo gives the girl the muscular stuffed elephant. She thanks him and promises to reward him later, leaving him visibly surprised while his friends tease him about the elephant being his most valuable asset. Later, Hyun-soo thinks about her promise while holding a gun. Unsure what she meant, he dismisses the thought and convinces himself that being good with a gun is nothing special. Elsewhere, a young woman with long dark hair and a leather jacket walks near a subway entrance, irritated by everything that has happened. She wonders why Kang-min would take an interest in someone like her and admits she had wanted to forget the whole incident. A young man approaches and asks what she is muttering about, even wondering if she is schizophrenic. She notices that his clothes closely resemble hers and jokes about their matching outfits. She then asks why he called her out alone on the weekend. He reminds her of the favor she agreed to at the room cafe, making it clear that she had promised to do one simple thing for him. Later, they walk through Seoul as he shows her local listings on his phone. He explains that he heard the neighborhood is one of the city's hottest areas. She claims she is only showing the country bumpkin from Daejeon around Seoul, though even she knows that excuse is unconvincing. She remembers seeing Kang-min beat those men and fears he might involve her in something dangerous. Meanwhile, Kang-min admires Seoul, even commenting that its pigeons look sophisticated. He turns toward her and suggests they eat first. She immediately assumes he likes her. As they continue walking, he asks what she wants to eat and shows her a restaurant recommended by his algorithm before taking a picture of them together. They enter a traditional restaurant where the table is covered with dozens of dishes. She is overwhelmed by the huge spread and questions why he ordered such an extravagant course. She then criticizes his choice of restaurant, joking that he must never have been on a date before awkwardly apologizing for saying it. Kang-min quietly admits that he has never really had proper friends. Looking at the food, she becomes unsure what she is supposed to do in such a situation, and grows irritated when his words make her feel guilty. He simply tells her to stop talking and eat. She reminds him that she is supposed to be dieting, but complains that he keeps taking her to places with such good food. Kang-min eagerly digs in and praises the meal. He then points out a supposedly special fried dish, confusing her because she has no idea what he is talking about. Noticing something on her face, he wipes toward it with a napkin and takes another picture of them together. Later, they visit a small cafe filled with plants and wooden furniture. An alpaca suddenly cries out, startling them both. Kang-min laughs at its unusual sound, only for the animal to spit directly in his face. She laughs while feeding it, noting how gentle it is. Kang-min raises his phone in disbelief, demanding whether she saw the alpaca's audacity. The animal gives another blunt cry, and his picture captures him mid-shout with the alpaca behind him, while she covers her mouth and laughs. Later that evening, they stopped outside a gallery advertising an exhibition. Kang-min looked at the sign, impressed by what he thought was profound modern art, and wondered about the title of the piece. Inside, he stood before a urinal displayed as an exhibit and read its placard, "Excretion, not art," with genuine confusion. He asked her if she felt the same emotion he did, comparing it to the sensation of pressing a flush button. She simply asked what he was talking about. Kang-min took another picture of them together, and finally checked the exhibition's name. The sign revealed that it was actually the 2026 Bathroom Products Expo. By night, they reached a grand, brightly lit building marked BR. Kang-min kept photographing her outside while she asked how long she had to keep posing. He casually replied that he would stop when he was satisfied. When her phone warned that his storage was full, he was confused because he believed he still had plenty of space. Looking through the pictures, she questioned why he had taken so many. Kang-min explained that every picture of her looked worthy of being preserved in a history book, like a national treasure. Later, as they walked beneath the night sky, she thanked him for making the tour enjoyable. Kang-min was glad to hear it, but admitted he did not want the evening to end yet. She looked at him uncertainly before turning toward an empty target board. Kang-min picked up a rifle, recalling his earlier shooting experience. He dismissed the challenge of hitting one target out of 10 as too easy. The bald stall owner suggested it would make a good gift for a girlfriend, but warned that the challenge was not as simple as it looked. Privately, the owner knew the rifle's sights had been deliberately ruined. Even a Special Forces veteran would struggle to hit anything with it. Kang-min tested the weapon and immediately realized how badly it had been set up, then suggested making a bet. She looked at the stuffed animals and decided that if she hit every target, she would win one of the prizes. Kang-min told her she would have to do one more favor for him. Without hesitation, he fired, One target after another shattered under his rapid shots, sparks scattering across the stall. The owner stared in disbelief while she watched Kang-min's back, unable to understand how he had hit every target. The owner wondered whether Kang-min was secretly a top-tier hitman. Kang-min simply shrugged and claimed it was his first time. He then helped her position the rifle, showing her how to press it firmly against her shoulder. She followed his instructions nervously, asking whether she was doing it correctly. Kang-min moved closer and adjusted her position until she understood. Later, while walking home, she held up her prize and complained about how ugly it was. She swung the strange, lumpy plush by its ear, questioning why such an awful-looking thing had been the grand prize and why it bounced so strangely. Alone with her thoughts, she wondered what favor Kang-min would ask from her next. Checking her phone, she discovered that he wanted her to post a picture of the two of them together on social media. She immediately realized that the entire Seoul tour had been an excuse from the beginning. Thinking back to how he had wiped sauce from her mouth, calmly taken countless pictures of her, and acted like an innocent, friendly guy, she became increasingly irritated. Staring at their photo, she wondered if he seriously believed such obvious tricks would make her fall for him. She covered her flushed face with both hands and quietly complained about how annoying he was. Still scrolling through the photos from their day, Han sees pictures from the restaurant and gallery, each marked with timestamps and location. More images follow as the elevator numbers rise toward the 5th floor. When the doors open, she is still staring at the photo of her and Kang-man. She suddenly freezes. A bleached blonde man stands behind her, watching her with a hard expression. In the empty hallway, Han stands in tears as he tells her that being out this late is dangerous and that she needs to come home earlier. She asks why he is there, but he only stares at her until she flinches. Inside her studio apartment, he remarks that the place brings back memories and that it has been a long time since he last saw it. He grabs her by the throat and pins her against the wall, asking whether this is the first time they have been alone together since that day. The scene shifts to the past. Han sits with several young men in her apartment as they drink together. Bottles cover the floor while everyone repeatedly raises their glasses. One man complains that the alcohol tastes watered down and jokes about eating it like soup with rice. Already unsteady, Han warns them to drink moderately and threatens them if anyone vomits in her apartment. The group only gets louder, while the blonde man assures her that he will keep an eye on everyone. Sitting beside him, Han comments that he seems more dependable now that he is older and asks whether that is where his confidence comes from. He tells her to trust him, smiling easily. As the night continues, empty soju bottles pile up. One by one, the men pass out across the apartment until only unconscious bodies remain scattered around the room. Han lies slumped on the couch as her friends sleep nearby. Later, a hand reaches toward her in the darkness as the blonde man quietly calls her name and asks whether she is asleep. He asks again while moving closer, his breathing growing heavier. A scream suddenly breaks through the night. Later, the blonde man stands over Han as she coughs and struggles on the floor. He tells her that everything happened because she reported him. He says he was expelled from school because of her, and that even his family abandoned him. In the dark kitchen, he blames Han for ruining his life. She angrily calls him a sex offender and confirms that he did what she accused him of. He rejects the accusation, insisting that she had led him on. A memory shows him repeatedly touching her under the guise of casual contact and making suggestive remarks about being rewarded for his attention. He had constantly flattered her, calling her dependable while gradually getting closer. Back in the present, he twists those memories into his own version of events, claiming Han liked him first and deliberately lured him in. He then holds a phone in front of her. On its screen is an old photo of Han smiling beside another young man, one she had previously posted online. He accuses her of posting the picture simply to make him jealous. Han stares at the screen in confusion and anger, unable to understand how the photograph could possibly justify what he had done. He holds the phone toward Han with a cold smile, suggesting they repeat what happened before and go shooting again. Before he can continue, a newcomer interrupts, saying he has heard enough. He strikes the man across the head and demands to know whether he has lost his mind. Han calls him completely unstable and tells him to crawl back to his mother. A memory flashes back to a younger Han kicking a stuffed toy in fear. Since that day, she has been waiting for the chance to face him again. Now holding a gun on him, she reveals that she secretly filmed herself while practicing everything she could, and she is finally ready to show him the result. She grabs him, making him cry out in pain. His hands tremble uncontrollably as he admits how badly he is shaking under her grip. When she twists his arm harder, he screams, but she refuses to release him. Meanwhile, Han quietly wonders why he arrived so quickly, covering her mouth as she thinks about the situation. Elsewhere, a young man watches from the shadows with a faint smile, satisfied that hiring paparazzi to capture everything had been worth it. In an alley, several masked men confirm that they secretly photographed everything from a distance and uploaded the images as instructed. One curses Ryu Kang-min for causing all their problems. Another complains that getting beaten at the room cafe had not been enough enough punishment, and that they are now being forced into ridiculous errands. They recall their orders to photograph Kang-min and Han together and post the pictures online, hoping it will prevent another beating. Nearby, a bald man rubs his temple, unable to understand why anyone would go through so much trouble over Cho Hyeon when men supposedly do not have feelings for her. He looks toward the apartment building, still confused by the entire situation. The men then address Jang Hyun-soo, telling him they went through considerable trouble to track him down. Hyun-soo sits against the wall and admits that he never expected such a childish trick to work on him. Kang-min studies him and asks whether he was really that desperate. Hyun-soo asks whether Kang-min is Han's boyfriend, then turns the question around by asking whether Kang-min had assumed he was her girlfriend. Without warning, Hyun-soo draws a gun and fires. Kang-min remains completely calm, only remarking that Hyun-soo did not even bother to give him a warning. Hyun-soo keeps the weapon trained on him and declares that if Kang-min disappears, Han will belong to him. Kang-min knocks the gun upward and turns it back toward Hyun-soo, asking whether he really wants Han that badly. He then proposes a shooting contest, with the winner claiming her for good. Kang-min raises his weapon and explains its single rule: one shot means instant death. Elsewhere, Jang Hyun-soo stares at his phone while half-dressed, horrified as a private video plays on the screen. He demands to know who leaked it, then becomes distracted by the camera angle even in the middle of his panic. After showering, he continues scrolling through his phone and suspects the technician who repaired it. He decides the repairman deserves a bullet, unaware that the real culprit is already in the room. A stranger sits calmly nearby with a gun resting on his knee, surrounded by cameras recording everything. Hyun-soo freezes and demands to know who he is. The stranger explains that Hyun-soo's video is already spreading online and has become a major topic. A phone mounted on a stand reveals the setup behind the recording. It had been positioned so Hyun-soo could practice his movements before trying them on someone else, while another camera secretly recorded from the bed. His private practice has now become evidence against him. The stranger studies him with a faint smile, criticizing his habit of giving himself feedback in bed as disturbing. His attention then shifts to a hidden weapon nearby, noting how dangerous it is for someone like Hyun-soo to possess it. Raising his own gun, the stranger calmly remarks that Hyun-soo has a rare talent for creating controversy. Hinu lunged forward, gripping the man's collar and demanding answers, refusing to be toyed with any longer. The room fell silent around the empty bed, the tripod still standing with his camera pointed at nothing. A symbol appeared, identified by the stranger simply as the network. He explained that the network existed to feed provocative content to the public, turning scandals into profit. Cocking his weapon, he introduced himself as someone who recruited talent like Henu, recognizing the potential in his reckless actions to create public scandal. With a faint smile and his gun raised, he invited Henu to join their rank. Later, in another dark room, a voice questioned whether Henu wanted Cho Hyeon badly enough to settle things with a shooting bet. Whoever won would claim her as the prize. Two guns faced each other as one man calmly reminded the other that his weapon was no ordinary gun. The dark-haired man raised his with a cold grin, warning that a single shot would mean instant death. Hinu remained unfazed and challenged him to fire. With the gun pressed against his own head, he asked what there was left to fear. The trigger clicked. The man leaned closer, taunting Henu for hesitating before firing. The shot rang through the hallway, sending Henu flipping backward onto the floor. Clutching his face, he groaned in confusion, realizing the supposed fatal shot had caused little damage. Turning the weapon over, he found a shell casing and discovered that rubber rounds had been loaded. He recalled that the shipment had been labeled as bullet delivery without mentioning the ammunition was fake. He sighed, realizing that a package like that obviously wouldn't contain real bullets. Nearby, the masked figure straightened and struggled with his jacket, while the blond man muttered about how humiliating the situation had become. Suddenly, a shot struck his shoulder, catching him off guard. The dark-haired man immediately recognized that the reaction had revealed too much of his opponent's intentions. Another blast tore through the room, destroying a small figure near the desk. Looking at the shattered pieces, he questioned whether the toy could even be considered a weapon, and remarked that children had no business playing with something like it. With smoke still rising from his gun, he pressed the barrel against the blond man's head. The wound on his shoulder clearly showed the work of someone skilled, meaning he had not inflicted it himself. The blond man cursed him and fired back, a bright burst of light erupting from his weapon. Smoke curled from the gun as the dark-haired man turned slightly. Noting that his history with that weapon was already known in the wrong circles, he reloaded with a sharp click and stared coldly at his opponent, finding it strange that someone with such a history had never spent a day in prison. He pressed the barrel closer and wondered whether a larger organization was backing him. The answer pointed toward a massive criminal network operating throughout Korea, hidden from ordinary view and using students as its instrument. Its members were scattered across the country, disguised among countless identical school uniforms. The organization operated through numerous small, disconnected cells known as a point organization, making the true structure almost impossible to uncover. Every lead ended at another dead end. Still, he refused to give up. No matter how difficult it became, he had to find them. On the table lay travel documents and a blank profile marked only as Batala, with the target's identity still unconfirmed and network verification pending. The reason was becoming clear. Somewhere within this web was the main target he had been assigned to eliminate simply because they belonged to it. The blond man scoffed, questioning whether he had found something amusing. Unwilling to be treated like a joke, the dark-haired man recognized him as a member of the network, someone he had already uncovered during his investigation into the organization. Rage boiled beneath his calm expression as he blamed the man for taking someone precious from him and becoming the first obstacle between him and his true target. To him, this fight was only a stepping stone toward reaching the person above them. A sudden movement broke the tension. The blond man reacted on instinct, raising his weapon and firing. He questioned coldly whether this was what dying looked like before aiming back with the same intent. A cry of pain followed as the bullet struck. The blond man staggered, blood spreading across his face before another impact sent him crashing through glass and debris. His phone fell nearby, its screen shattered. Amid the wreckage, Kang-min calmly opened a can and asked whether he intended to keep resisting. Addressing him as Mr. Criminal, the wounded man weakly denied being the villain, insisting he was only a victim. Later, alone in the darkness, the blond man stared at his phone and whispered Hyun's name. Messages filled the screen as he desperately asked why she wasn't reading them or answering his calls. Confused and furious, he felt that something about the situation was deeply wrong. A memory surfaced of Hyun standing close to him with her hand against his chest. She had once told him that shooting guns together was cool, but the memory now felt bitter. Surrounded by scattered gun replicas, he curled into himself and muttered that all his practice had been for nothing. With his back turned, he insisted that he was simply a victim betrayed by love. Kang-min took another sip from his can, unimpressed, and dryly remarked that calling himself a victim was certainly a creative interpretation. In the wrecked kitchen, the blond man raised his gun and muttered about love. He turned toward Hyun and declared that he loved her. Kang-min remained unmoved, questioning how he could claim to love her after everything he'd done. Hyun sat against the wall and quietly insisted that she loved him too, admitting through her trembling voice that she still loved him despite everything that had happened. The blond man raised his weapon higher and desperately declared that he loved her with everything he had. His grip tightened as he admitted that if he couldn't have her, nothing else mattered. Kang-min's gaze hardened. He made it clear that no one else would have her either. Hyun moved toward the fallen weapon, finally realizing how far things had gone. She reached out and begged him to wait, saying that since her life was already ruined, there was no reason to hold back anymore. Gunfire suddenly erupted. Shots tore through glass and metal as shell casings scattered across the wrecked apartment. Twin pistols fired repeatedly into a battered refrigerator door. When the shooting stopped, Kang-man knelt behind the smoking guns, sweat running down his face as he caught his breath. The refrigerator remained standing despite the damage, prompting the dry observation that Korean appliances were built to last. Kang-man pulled the refrigerator door away, revealing the two women crouched safely behind it. Bullet holes covered the metal, but the improvised shield had held. The dark-haired woman stared at Kang-min in confusion, unable to understand who he was or why he had stepped between them and the gunfire. Standing over the wreckage with his weapon still in hand, Kang-man turned toward them as one of the women finally voiced the question hanging over the room. Why would anyone dive into a storm of bullets just to save one girl? The wounded gunman, his forehead bleeding from a deep scar, fell silent before muttering that he had a guess about who the stranger really was. The dark-haired woman lowered her eyes in disbelief, wondering if her suspicion could actually be true. She turned toward the destroyed bedroom and asked whether the man they'd heard about was really standing in her home. Rain streaked the white-haired attacker's scarred face as he gritted his teeth, refusing to accept what was happening. Kang-min's expression remained cold and unreadable as he asked whether they were really that curious about his identity. The woman stood close beside him, cheeks flushed as she admitted she was too embarrassed to say his name aloud. The white-haired man staggered up and aimed his gun at Kang-man, screaming in rage. Kang-man moved instantly. His blade flashed through the air, destroying the weapon before fragments scattered around him. The attacker gasped as blood dripped from his ruined hand. He screamed in agony, clutching the mangled stump where his finger had been severed. Kang-man leaned closer and warned him to keep quiet before the neighbors heard them. He calmly threatened to take the rest of his hand hand if he didn't stop screaming. Holding the Glock M00007, chambered in 9mm parabellum, Kang-min told him that what came next would be different. He tilted the weapon toward the light and made it clear that the round he had fired was real. The white-haired man froze and begged for mercy, asking whether Kang-min truly meant it. The slide racked with a cold click, sending panic across his face. He screamed that he refused to die before stumbling toward the door. Kang-min simply watched him escape, a faint smirk crossing his face as he remarked that the man could run surprisingly fast when properly motivated. Alone in the wrecked kitchen, Kang-min pulled his hood over his head and muttered that the man should have run from the beginning. Later, he walked through a crowded night street surrounded by neon signs. Ahead, a maid cafe glowed brightly as a cat-eared maid invited passers-by inside. The fleeing blonde man shoved past her, dismissing her as some cute cat. She stumbled and cried out, but he only told her to get lost before disappearing into the crowd. Moments later, he clutched his head and groaned, wondering how much longer his misery would continue. Kang-min's voice came from behind, calmly asking how much longer he intended to run. At a crosswalk, the blonde man turned around in confusion, insisting that he didn't understand what he'd done to deserve this. Surrounded by pedestrians, he shouted that the woman had used him and that she was the one responsible. Tears streamed down his face as he demanded to know why everyone kept taking their anger out on him. Kang-min stood behind him with his phone lowered, observing the scene with mild interest. He remarked that the man still had plenty of energy left. Farther down the street, a giant perfume billboard illuminated the building. Kang-min noted that they had reached their destination faster than expected. His phone displayed a mirroring request, ready to project its contents onto the outdoor screen. He asked whether they were ready. The billboard flickered, and the mirrored video began playing, replacing the perfume advertisement with the blonde man's own face frozen in the footage. A bloodshot eye stared in shock as the blonde man realized something was wrong. Pedestrians stopped and stared at the electronic billboard, confused by the sudden footage appearing above them. Their whispers quickly turned into laughter as they mocked the humiliating video, comparing him to a plucked chicken and joking that it looked like an advertisement for a urology clinic. His humiliation deepened when the billboard displayed a message mocking him for being too small. Surrounded by staring strangers, he snapped and loudly insisted that it wasn't small at all. He tried to excuse himself by claiming he was simply having a bad day, while Kang-min watched from a distance with a faint smirk. The man's expression changed to horror when he realized the video wasn't over. Kang-min held up his phone and calmly asked whether he was the one responsible for spreading the footage. As the pedestrian signal counted down, the blonde man suddenly sprinted across the street, desperately screaming for someone to take the video down. Mid-run, he stumbled as blood appeared on his hand. Before he could understand what had happened, a speeding truck tore through the crosswalk and struck him, sending his body spinning through the air. Bystanders gasped in horror as the billboard continued displaying his recorded face above them. Some wondered aloud whether he had actually died. Kang-min turned toward the accident and pretended to be surprised, asking whether the man was really dead. Walking away calmly, Kang-min admitted that even he hadn't expected things to end that way. With sirens approaching, he quietly decided that the man had gotten what he deserved while the crowd called for an ambulance. Later, morning sunlight covered the school campus as students discussed the news. One student mentioned that Jang Han-soo had reportedly been hit by a truck. Another confirmed he'd already seen the story spreading across social media, showing a headline describing it as the biggest billboard hacking incident ever. Students in the back joked that their school had produced a celebrity, adding crude remarks about the footage. A girl near the window corrected them irritably before returning to her thoughts. Alone in the locker room, she wondered why Han-soo had been hit by a car on the same day he'd appeared at her home. The coincidence bothered her, and she complained about the headache she couldn't shake. Her memories returned to the previous night. Han-soo had appeared unexpectedly in her apartment, and everything afterward had become unclear. She remembered only his threatening expression before screaming, after which her memory went completely blank. She wondered if she had passed out. Elsewhere, Kang-min sat quietly with his back turned and again praised Korean appliances. Still, something bothered him. He remembered the refrigerator door that had stopped the bullets and was fairly certain he'd heard his own name during the chaos. In a dim, empty space, two shadowy figures faced each other. One asked whether she had woken up yet before approaching the motionless figure. He calmly observed that her house was quite a mess, but assured her that she didn't need to worry about it. A bespectacled man wearing gloves interrupted with a report, gesturing toward the hazmat-suited workers behind him and stating that the cleanup was already underway. The suited man acknowledged it, adding casually that the cleanup would include erasing her memories of that night as well. Elsewhere, the girl touched her lips absent-mindedly, sensing something strange about her situation but unable to identify the source of her unease. Later, Kang-min walked home beneath a lone street lamp, carrying a small plastic bag. He complained that he couldn't find a convenience store willing to sell him cigarettes and questioned why his current identity had to be only 17 years old. He wished they had made him 24 with his military service already completed. Instead, he'd been forced to quit smoking for 3 years and would have to go through military service again. Hearing someone approach from behind, Kang-min turned and calmly asked what they wanted. A man in a dark suit stepped into the light and formally addressed him as Mr. Ryu Kang-min. Kang-min eyed him warily, pointing out how suspicious it was for a stranger to approach a high school student at night. The man politely apologized before bringing up the billboard hacking incident from the previous night. He held up a card and praised Kang-min's impressive work. The emblem on it identified the organization he represented as the network. Kang-min gave a faint, knowing smile, realizing this was exactly what he had expected. The man showed him the trending news about the billboard incident and explained that its scale had forced the organization to take an interest in him. They were specifically searching for someone capable of creating that level of chaos. Kang-min casually joked that he simply had a trendy sense of style, while privately recognizing that this encounter marked the real beginning of his plan. He intended to infiltrate one of the network's point organizations as an insignificant, low-level member and gradually climb its hidden hierarchy until he reached his true target. He considered the usual method of earning trust and rising through the ranks, but pointed out that point organizations reserved the position of scouter for upper-ranking members. The suited man explained that a scouter would likely communicate directly with the boss or remain close enough to influence the organization's leadership. Kang-min lit a cigarette and immediately told him to take him straight to the boss. In response, a gun was suddenly raised toward him. Elsewhere, in a quiet room filled with flowers, a long-haired blonde woman calmly trimmed stems with a pair of scissors, while a pale butterfly rested nearby. She paused over a red hibiscus, then briefly looked up after sensing something behind her. She named the flower without turning around, her expression sharp and unreadable. A man perched on the window frame behind her broke the silence with a blunt comment about her figure. She turned toward him, irritated, and corrected him before dismissing his claim about the flower's meaning, saying he had clearly gotten it from an AI chatbot. Her attention then shifted to something more serious. She placed her hand firmly on the table, sending the scissors clattering beside it. A sudden motion cut through the remaining tension. The scene revealed how he had entered her home, dropping in from above and landing precisely while she sat below, unaware until he appeared. She looked up in disapproval, questioning his habit of intruding without warning. He raised a Navy passport and snipped its corner with the same scissors from her flower arrangement. She was startled by the name Spade A, realizing he was far from ordinary. Later, they sat together in the living room. She asked whether it was time for him to leave for Korea. He joked that pigeons had taken over the runway and delayed his flight, then asked if he could stay and rest. He leaned closer, claiming he couldn't sleep without a lap pillow, but she flatly refused. Putting the jokes aside, she asked why he had really come. She then questioned whether every contract killer received a new identity whenever they went on a mission. The passport fell open on the floor, revealing something unusual. This time it carried his real identity, Ryu Kang-min, along with his actual date of birth. When she asked what he was planning, he explained that using his real identity was simply his consideration toward him, not part of some hidden scheme. A voice then explained the terms of his final assignment. Once the mission was complete, he would no longer use the codename Spade. Under his real name, Ryu Kang-min, he would supposedly be allowed to live freely. Kang-min repeated the word freedom with disbelief. He recalled his past assignments, including eliminating a Supreme Council member and a wealthy American family, noting that every life he had taken had ultimately been valued in money. Holding a red rose, he questioned why the life of one Korean citizen was suddenly worth nothing more than a promise of freedom. She explained that the decision came from high command and was already settled. She then retrieved a recently verified report from a drawer and handed it to him. The document revealed that his target had created an organization of his own. Only a few members had been identified, while most remained hidden. Kang-min's first objective was to contact one known member, a student connected to the organization through the school he was about to infiltrate. Looking over the report, Kang-min wondered if he was really being asked to play house with a group of students. She warned him not to make assumptions about the mission. Holding up a rose, she compared the organization to roots buried deep underground, suggesting that its true structure remained hidden beneath the surface. Later that night, a young man in glasses sensed someone approaching from behind and demanded to be taken to the place they needed to go. Kang-min faced him with a plastic-wrapped gun between them and calmly said he wanted to be taken to his boss. The young man refused, insisting it was impossible. Kang-min smiled faintly and told him that threats would not work on him. The young man mocked him, asking if that was so. Kang-min calmly clarified that he wasn't making a threat at all. As he spoke, a sudden pressure radiated from him, shaking the surrounding panel with tension. The boy's eyes widened behind his glasses as he stammered, unsure what he was dealing with. Remaining composed, he dismissed the weapon as a double B gun and questioned why anyone would carry one around. Kang-min raised it toward ignored him and remarked that he was more surprised a 17-year-old was carrying what appeared to be a toy. The student then asked how Kang-min had realized it was fake. The boy explained that no Korean high school student would ever carry a real firearm. Kang-min offered a simple explanation, pointing out the weapon's lighter weight, cheap paint, toy springs squeak, and plastic trigger friction before the boy reminded him to keep it simple. Kang-min then asked what the boy's real goal was. The student immediately clarified that he meant Kang-min's purpose in approaching their network. Kang-min leaned close and whispered into his ear, making the boy recoil. The student pointed out that Kang-min had approached him first outside his home, and Kang-min admitted he had a point. They agreed to meet the following day at 2. With the boy waiting at the address written on the business card. Afterward, Kang-min remained uneasy. Examining the fake gun, he confirmed that it was only a toy, yet the faint smell of gunpowder around it made no sense. He wondered whether the boy had somehow noticed something he shouldn't have. From a distance, someone observed Kang-min and recognized that he was no ordinary salesman. As rain poured down, the suspicion was confirmed. He was a contract killer. Inside a quiet apartment, a school uniform hung in the closet, confirming that contact had been made. Nearby, a laptop displayed surveillance information revealing the network's true nature, an organization that used minors to create social unrest. Uniforms ranging from firefighters and soldiers to police officers lined the wall, each serving as part of the group's operation. A wall covered in documents and photographs connected by red thread showed an investigation that had repeatedly reached the same conclusion. Success was highly unlikely. Elsewhere, Kang-min peeled a boiled egg and remarked on how easily people lied. Beside him sat a broken toy figure modeled after him, prompting a voice to accuse him of deliberately making the character look foolish. He quickly denied it. The discussion revealed that the network disguised itself as an illegal student club, while its true identity was a massive criminal organization operating throughout Korea. During training, the woman explained that the network's methods were similar to her own side, which operated behind the front of a hotel casino. She reasoned that the organization likely used minors as a cover to avoid attracting attention from the authority. Despite having gathered information, she admitted they still understood very little about the group and wondered if it truly was as dangerous as the reports suggested. A calmer voice identified the target directly as the Batala of Korea, or at least an organization that had earned that reputation. The woman then noted that the network had noticed Kang-min remarkably quickly. Surprised by how fast he had attracted their attention, she immediately corrected herself, insisting the network had not noticed Kang-min quickly at all. Her attention returned to the investigation wall, where red strings connected scattered files, photographs, and evidence. Even after analyzing every available clue and tracing every possible connection, they still remained far from the main target. A blank photograph sat beneath the name Lee San, the man whose identity they still couldn't uncover. Kang-min crushed a capsule between his fingers, recognizing that reaching Lee San required things to move much faster. He reflected that if the man hadn't been hit by a car, he could have extracted far more information from him before losing the lead. Meanwhile, a hospital news broadcast reported that the electronic billboard at Hungai intersection had been hacked the previous night, with illegal footage displayed across the city. Police were still searching for the hacker, but the investigation had stalled. An injured patient in a neck brace complained about the police's failure to catch him. Nearby, Kang-min, disguised as a doctor, remarked that the hacker had caused an innocent bystander like him to get caught in the chaos. The patient angrily dismissed him and questioned why the hacker would do something so reckless. His expression changed as he remembered that the man had been carrying a real gun. Kang-min feigned confusion, questioning how anyone could have a firearm in Korea. He then leaned closer and concluded that the patient clearly knew nothing useful. Hoping to extract information, he revealed a syringe filled with dark liquid and explained that now the boy had become an adult, his role was about to change. The patient demanded to know what he was talking about and suddenly questioned whether Kang-min was actually a doctor. Kang-min remained calm as he prepared the syringe, remarking that the incident would make an interesting headline. A bloodied syringe lay on the floor as he imagined the report. A hospital staff member's tragic death, blamed on drug abuse. The patient panicked and struggled against the restraints securing him to the bed, demanding to know what kind of twisted plan Kang-min was talking about. Elsewhere, another man woke up chained to a table. He struggled against the restraints, demanding to know who had captured him and why. A gray-haired man wearing a badge stepped forward and introduced himself as a member of the organization that had hired him. As the restrained man's fist tightened, a tube connected to his wrist continued feeding something into his body. A device bearing the network symbol turned between someone's fingers. A voice simply identified it as the network. The chained man's body suddenly convulsed violently, his face contorting in agony as blood began pouring from him. His hand man shook as he remembered hearing that people like him could die instantly, with blood pouring from their eyes, nose, and mouth. He recalled the injection itself, which initially caused almost no sensation. The gray-haired man stood over the hospital bed, quietly observing the bloodied body. He remarked that hearing about such deaths was one thing, but witnessing one firsthand was fascinating. The scene shifted to a busy city intersection. Someone complained that they had been told to arrive by 2 and held up a black card bearing the network symbol, saying they had been promised someone would be waiting there. Ryu Kang-min stood alone nearby with his phone, wondering why nobody had arrived. A man spotted him and immediately recognized him, calling out his name. The gray-haired man approached with a lazy grin, asking if Kang-min had been waiting long. Kang-min misunderstood him, asking if he was talking about Wi-Fi. The man corrected him and introduced himself as a representative of the network. He teased Kang-min for being late and asked whether he had come from abroad, joking about Korea's reputation for politeness. Kang-min apologized, explaining that urgent business had delayed him. A student in uniform then questioned why the wealthy gentleman from the previous day had been replaced by someone wearing a hoodie. He suspected the whole arrangement looked like a pyramid scheme, where recruits were shown successful members to lure them in. The gray-haired man laughed off the accusation, saying appearances could be misleading. When his phone beeped, he promised the student that their transportation would be luxurious. A Rolls-Royce immediately pulled up, leaving the student stunned. Later, the gray-haired man sat inside, proudly claiming that choosing the network had been the best decision of his life. Kang-min hesitated before getting into the car, while the man eagerly admired the leather interior. The Rolls-Royce sped down the road. Kang-min panicked as traffic blurred past, while the gray-haired man casually praised its V12 twin-turbo engine. Kang-min warned that they were driving dangerously fast. Seeing a highway sign for Yonggi Hasong, he became convinced they were about to crash. He imagined the impact throwing them from their seats, crushing their bodies against the asphalt and leaving them vulnerable to passing vehicles. The gray-haired man called his thoughts morbid and asked whether Kang-min had actually studied how people died. He then remarked that Kang-min, of all people, should know. Kang-min stiffened and questioned how he could possibly know that. The gray-haired man's smile widened as he told Kang-min that he was a worse actor than expected. He then mentioned Batala, followed by another name. Spada Kang-min's expression immediately changed. The confusion disappeared as he demanded that the man repeat what he had just said. The gray-haired man offered to introduce himself properly. Extending his hand, he said it was nice to meet Kang-min, and revealed that he was the very person Kang-min had been desperately searching for. Blood specks scattered across Kang-min's face as his eyes burned red. Elsewhere, a man named Lee San, wearing a gray suit and glasses, stood in a dim hallway. He confirmed that the matter had been handled and reported on the previous night's incident at the studio apartment. An underage network member had acted without authorization. Memories flashed by, a blonde man holding a gun to someone's head, followed by a window shattering amid gunfire. Meanwhile, every trace of the incident was systematically erased. Property damage, fingerprints, bloodstains, CCTV footage, and complaints all disappeared. Nothing remained to prove the incident had ever happened. Lee San then raised a photograph of a young woman wearing a school uniform. She had no visible external injuries, and the cleanup team had erased her memory of the incident with drugs to ensure nothing remained. A gray-haired young man questioned how that was possible after so much gunfire. The suited man calmly explained that the lack of visible wounds did not rule out internal bleeding, and that a CT scan and monitoring would be arranged. The gray-haired man then interrupted with a grin, holding up 2 ID cards and asking whether his performance had been convincing enough to pass as a doctor. He admitted that he had spent the entire night studying medical dramas and even taking selfies to prepare. The suited man ignored the theatrics and continued with his report. The gray-haired man raised his phone again and revealed that he had been investigating Ryu Kang-min. According to official records, Ryu Kang-min appeared to be an ordinary high school student. However, his administrative, history, and school records had been completely fabricated. After tracing his identity through an international broker, they uncovered the truth. Kang-min was originally from the Philippines, and his real occupation was a contract killer. The gray-haired man was stunned by the revelation, finding it absurd that a professional killer was now fighting alongside high school students. He admitted that even he had struggled to believe it. The suited man corrected him, explaining that Kang-min's age wasn't the real concern. The danger came from the organization behind him. Batala. The name left both men stunned. The gray-haired man repeated it in disbelief before confirming that it was the same Batala he knew. He then became excited rather than frightened, deciding he wanted to find Kang-min himself and get his autograph. Meanwhile, a white luxury sedan sped down the highway as the meeting countdown continued. Blood speckled the air, while red eyes appeared beneath dark hair. He introduced himself simply as Lean. Kang-min's eyes narrowed at the name. A dossier revealed the target's information: Lean, South Korea. Korean, currently residing in Seoul. Kang-min's expression hardened as he processed the assignment. Inside the moving car, someone suggested killing him immediately. Kang-min reacted, but the stranger beside him raised a finger and told him to think logically. Anyone meeting a contractor sent by Batala would obviously arrive prepared. The tires screeched as the vehicle accelerated. From above, several more cars joined the convoy, surrounding their vehicle. The stranger casually revealed that he had brought some friends and warned Kang-min not to try anything foolish. As a hand moved toward Kang-min's collar, a single word emerged: spade. Sharp pain flickered across Kang-min's face as he exhaled, his expression darkening when he realized the situation had become dangerous. At Sikatuna Coffee, a man waited beneath the clear sky with black coffee and a spade-emblazoned envelope, remarking that they had probably figured everything out by now. A short-haired, silver-haired dealer leaned on her hand, questioning whether the plan was really worth pursuing. Her title identified her as a hot bal casino dealer and support agent, Heart 3. She recalled what she'd been taught: forged identities had to be flawless. Across from her, a blonde woman with a ponytail looked toward the ocean and asked her boss to confirm the statement. She questioned whether the flaws in the forged documents had been intentional, perhaps giving them an excuse to eliminate a troublesome man. Her boss denied it, explaining that reaching the organization's deepest layers quickly required someone to expose himself and deliberately attract attention. The younger woman noted that the call they'd received came from Spade. The dealer mused that creating enough curiosity to make the organization investigate them made sense, then wondered what would happen afterward. She posed an even colder question. If the organization discovered their target was Lian, would they really stay passive? He would either end up dead or be torn apart. There was no third outcome. The blonde woman asked whether the dealer knew the secret to deceiving someone perfectly. The dealer guessed a honey trap. The answer was simpler: mix a single spoonful of lies into the truth. A sugar cube dropped into the coffee, dissolving into what was described as 100% pure truth. Elsewhere, inside a crowded car on the highway, Kang-min admitted that he already knew everything, including why his companion had entered Korea under a false identity. The passenger froze when Kang-min revealed that Batala was hunting him. He questioned why the man had recklessly abandoned the organization and run, regardless of how valuable freedom might be. Kang-min's expression darkened as he admitted that something had happened that still angered him whenever he thought about it, prompting the passenger to lean closer, eager to hear the story. Back at the seaside table, the dealer's gaze sharpened. The stage was already set. All that remained was to mix one spoonful of lies into the truth and let the trap close naturally. Behind a masked figure with white hair, gears turned in the darkness as his mismatched eyes gleamed. He vowed to take the events of his life and rearrange them into an entirely new scenario. Kang-min lowered his head, wondering where to begin. Memories surfaced of an old assassin promised retirement after one final assignment to eliminate a congressman. Instead, he was left broken and bloodied after completing the job. A boarding pass under the name Ryu Kang-min marked his flight from the Philippines to Korea, carrying his hope of finally returning home and living freely. But that freedom never came. A Batala operative was already waiting in Korea with a blade, intending to kill him. Kang-min's reflection doubled in the window as he acknowledged the truth. Batala had never intended to let him go. The stranger beside him tapped his knuckles against the folder, asking if Kang-min was on the run and questioning why he hadn't simply stayed hidden somewhere no one could find him. He wondered why Kang-min had gone to such lengths to attract attention instead of disappearing quietly. Kang-min answered that drawing attention was the only way to provoke a reaction from them. The stranger reached into a hidden compartment, joking that if someone wanted to hide a dog properly, they had to put it somewhere unexpected, like a dog cafe. Kang-min admitted that Batala would eventually come for him no matter what he did, so he needed protection against the inevitable. Holding up his cup, he made his offer directly: guarantee his safety, and he would work for them. A digital clock ticked on the dashboard as the stranger scoffed, asking if Kang-min expected too much from an organization made mostly of students and wondering if he'd come to the wrong place. Kang-min lifted a spoon and explained that the network he knew was something entirely different. It was a group of contract killers, nothing less. Back at the seaside table, the dealer stirred her coffee and dismissed the underage members as mere distractions. The blonde woman added that they were disposable smoke screens used to conceal the real killings. She wondered whether Kang-min's death could simply disappear beneath a headline about teenagers hijacking a bus for a joyride, though she admitted such a cover story would never hold. Her companion questioned where her certainty came from. The woman leaned closer and asked whether she even needed a reason for what she was about to say. Taking a slow sip, she introduced herself as Spade A. Inside the moving car, the dashboard displayed a connection notice as the passenger repeated her title, noting that Batala's Spade A was joining the network. Kang-min studied her beneath his dark hair with a faint smirk. Her offer was tempting, even sweet, but he declined while twirling a toothpick between his lips. He'd already had enough sweets for one day. Too much sugar-rotted teeth, after all, and he was terrified of dentists. Outside, the white sedan moved through a river of black SUVs. A voice questioned whether Kang-min ever truly knew what was happening. As the dashboard clock passed the hour, she presented two possibilities. Either his story contained lies, or he'd approached them with another purpose from the beginning. Kang-min's grin widened as he compared the arrangement to a poison chalice. He called the exchange pleasant and almost genuine, then calmly announced that their paths would separate there. The passenger finally lost patience, asking why Kang-min couldn't simply speak honestly instead of hiding behind pudding and dentist jokes. Kang-min only feigned confusion and asked what he meant. Through the tinted window, a black SUV waited. The message was clear. If they chose to bring Kang-min in, an armed conflict with Batala was possible. Standing against the darkness, Kang-min heard the voice behind him ask whether he was scared. He took a moment before commenting on the absurdity of an entire swarm of goons being mobilized to deal with one man. The convoy drew closer in the side mirror as the voice insisted that Batala had him rattled. Kang-min rolled his shoulder and conceded that the network might be the best in the business, but only within Korea's borders, and nowhere beyond. His expression turned feral, eyes widening beneath his hair as he declared without hesitation that they would be the ones to win. Elsewhere, a rusted Ferris wheel groaned beneath a gray sky while an abandoned carousel horse stood below with cracked, hollow eyes. Kang-min stepped out of the car and adjusted his tie as he took in the scene. Kang-min mused that it had been 10 years since he'd last visited an amusement park, though the atmosphere was nothing like he remembered. The abandoned park stretched out in ruins with a castle spire and dragon statue overlooking broken rides and scattered debris. A headless mannequin stood on a stump beside a motionless body, making him wonder if Halloween had already arrived. The gray-haired man leaned against the trunk and noted that the park had closed long ago. He tapped the car's hood, pointing out the advantages. No people and no cameras. The trunk opened to reveal a blood-stained sack containing something unmistakable. Calling it the perfect place to dispose of a body, he admitted he'd originally planned to kill Kang-min there along with the person inside. Kang-min immediately noticed the man's use of the past tense. The man laughed and said he'd changed his mind. His tone then became serious as he explained that one detail in Kang-min's report had bothered him. He held up a photograph of a young woman wearing a red tie and pointed out that the female witness had suffered no physical injuries. Instead, her memory had been erased with drugs. He emphasized how strange that was when bullets had torn through the entire scene. She hadn't received a single scratch. His theory was that Kang-min had fought while protecting her. He wanted to know why. Whether Kang-min had simply been trying to prevent a third party from being connected to him as a contractor. He suggested it would have been more efficient to eliminate the witness altogether, questioning whether Kang-min had avoided doing so merely to prevent attention, or because attracting attention had been his real objective. Kang-min tightened his expression and asked, almost incredulously, whether he was suggesting that he'd grown attached to her. The man turned away and named the woman. A bound and gagged figure appeared behind him, her eyes wide with fear as sweat ran down her face. Kang-min froze when he recognized her. It was Cho Hyan. The man casually gestured toward her, explaining that he wanted to see whether Kang-min truly was a talented asset and whether he really was Batala's Spade A. Correcting himself, he said he needed to confirm it personally. He held out a spoon and instructed Kang-min to take a big spoonful of pudding. If he did, he would let Kang-min join them. Photos appeared one after another, Kang-min and Hyan walking together, laughing with a stuffed toy, and sharing a moment while practicing with a rifle. The man mocked the idea that one of the world's top contractors could actually be swayed by something as trivial as sentiment. He urged Kang-min to go ahead. Kang-min slowly raised the spoon, his expression unreadable as Hyan stared from the darkness with tears and sweat covering her face. The demand came again, one big spoonful. Kang-min's face darkened as he raised the spoon and asked coldly whether a family-sized portion would do. A waiter then placed an enormous dessert on the table, announcing the 127-centimeter parfait tower they'd ordered. Cream, fruit, and jelly rose high above the glass, topped with cones and tiny umbrellas. Kang-min stared at it in disbelief, saying it was far too big. Beside him, the blond man wondered whether anyone could actually fit that much into their stomach. Slouched on the couch, Kang-min muttered that his brain was about to drown in sugar. Across from them, a tattooed man waited on the phone. When the call connected, a photo of Cho Hyan appeared on the screen. He wondered what she was doing, since she had been the one who insisted on eating the dessert in the first place. With a spoonful still in his mouth, the blond man asked whether Hyan had been kidnapped. The call went unanswered, followed by an automated message saying she couldn't be reached. Elsewhere, a dossier marked Main Target contained almost no personal information, everything crossed out except the name Lean. A pale, silver-haired man sat beneath a single light, fanning a hand of cards across a round table. His thoughts focused on the target sitting opposite him. Once he eliminated this man, the mission would be complete. But doubt crept in as he studied his opponent's calm expression. Was this really Lean? Suddenly, a faceless mannequin occupied the seat instead, still holding the cards. He wondered if it was a fake designed to test him. He held up 2 cards, one depicting a crash test dummy and another showing a grinning Joker beneath a crescent moon. He reasoned that his chances were 50-50. If he drew the fake, he'd know immediately. Metal limbs lay scattered across the floor, the dummy dismantled while the Joker card burned beside it. He concluded that the real Lean would recognize his intentions and disappear the moment he made his move. Meanwhile, Cho Hyun remained bound, her face filled with dread as she reminded herself not to act recklessly. 2 men stood together, one pale-haired and one dark-haired, their expressions unreadable. Kang-min decided he had no choice but to play along for now. The silver-haired man studied him, noting how energetic he'd been earlier before suddenly becoming quiet. He warned that now the moment had arrived, Kang-min wouldn't be able to go through with it. Kang-min immediately drove his foot into him. The blood-stained sack twitched again as the silver-haired man admitted things had gotten disgusting after he'd stabbed it. He then asked whether Kang-min had actually gone through with it. Hyun's eyes widened as a manic grin spread across her face, her bound body jerking against the chains. She guessed the entire thing might have been fake from the beginning. A voice asked when Kang-min had realized the truth. He answered simply that he'd known from the start. A burning silhouette flickered behind him, revealing muscle and sinew beneath a torn disguise. Kang-min explained that even a perfect disguise couldn't reproduce someone's natural build or muscle density. He questioned why they had gone to such lengths before a strange sound interrupted him. A voice called it a mic test and asked whether he could hear clearly. Kang-min looked around the empty square, wondering where the speaker had gone. The unseen man complained about Kang-min's lack of reaction, saying he'd worked hard to arrange the surprise only for the response to be disappointing. Standing beside a speaker mounted on a post, Kang-min connected the pieces. The person he'd been speaking to earlier had been a fake disguised as his friend. Chained wrists appeared near the car, tattooed fingers catching the gray light. Kang-min immediately identified the woman as a network member and contractor. She corrected him with a faint smile. She was more precisely a former network member. Her expression turned feral as the chains scraped against each other. A traitor. The Ferris wheel loomed over the abandoned park as she rattled her chains, remarking that Kang-min had gone through considerable trouble to capture a traitor like her. She admitted she'd wondered why he'd made her go through all this. A blond man grinned through his restraints, chains pressing against his throat as he jokingly asked whether everything had been arranged for a surprise party. His file identified him as Lee Daniel, a former network member and traitor accused of murdering civilians and desertion. Kang-min repeated the word traitor skeptically, sensing something deeper behind the label. He asked whether it was just him or if there was an ulterior motive behind everything. The speaker praised his instincts, calling him as sharp as ever. Kang-min remained standing apart from the blond man. Both men stood in shadow beneath the lamplight as the voice explained their connection. They were both marked for death by the organization they had once served. The blond man tilted his head back with an exhausted grin as the voice revealed that this was why a resurrection match had been arranged. The masked figure gripped the microphone and laid out the terms. They would fight with their lives on the line, and only the winner would be allowed to join the team. The speaker crackled before the final command came through. "Let's begin." Kang-min remained motionless as a violent strike tore through the car, splitting the metal and pavement in one blow, and sending the blond man flying backward. Still smiling despite his restraints, he pressed his bound hands against his throat and admitted that the destruction looked wonderful. The wrecked car lay perfectly divided, with debris scattered across both sides. A voice admired the destruction, calling it beautiful. Crouching beside a metal railing, Kang-min pressed one hand against the shattered concrete and called the scene art, describing the destruction as fitting decoration for his work. A voice behind him questioned the sudden remark. The blond man swung down from above with chains wrapped around his arms and launched himself at Kang-min. Kang-min calmly declared that he was an artist who killed people. The chains ripped through cars and barriers, scattering wreckage across the pavement. He explained that he presented his work to the art world, transforming his target's corpses into high-level pieces. Recalling his last creation, he noted how vividly the memory remained with him. The blond man, revealed as Paekong, grabbed his temples and admitted that he had even used his target's family as surrounding decorations. Kang-min's expression hardened as he asked whether Paekong had only killed innocent people or had also played with their bodies afterward. Sunj flinched as Kang-min pulled him back by the chains. Kang-min declared that he wasn't merely a psychopath but an artistic one. Tears streamed down Sunj's face as the chains tightened around his throat. Yet he accepted the words as a compliment. Sunj insisted that Kang-min simply couldn't understand because an artist needed something more. Kang-min tightened his grip and pulled the chains further, emphasizing the need for a flexible mind. Sunj smiled despite the restraint, comparing the chain's movements to the graceful motion of a woman. Kang-min's eyes narrowed as he said it was time to show Sunj exactly what kind of piece he would become. A massive shockwave sent Sunj flying. Kang-min methodically explained that before rigor mortis set in, he would need to preserve the joints and facial muscles to capture the dynamic life of a contractor. He would then soak the body in hydrogen peroxide to bleach it white, expressing withered humanity. Finally, he planned to impale the body on a wooden pole as a representation of stolen freedom. His expression remained cold as he continued building the image of the finished piece. The two stood apart inside the abandoned carousel. Sunj looked around the decayed structure and asked whether Kang-min intended to turn him into a carousel horse. Dragging his chains behind him, Sunj walked forward and amusedly compared himself to one. Sunj clenched his chained fist and defended his craft, insisting that men's work meant nothing beside his own. But his sentence broke off when his eyes widened in alarm. The chains around the carousel snapped tight, pulling from every direction. A voice declared that this piece was nothing like cheap mass-produced junk. The carved horses shattered one after another under the pressure, wood and paint breaking apart as Sunj stood beneath the falling debris with his arms spread wide. Turning away, Sunj compared his own art to what he called mere chunks of metal and plastic, insisting his work existed on an entirely different level. He then wondered what was wrong with metal and plastic in the first place. Kang-min warned him to watch his mouth. Sunj raised his bloodied arm, chains wrapped around it, and proudly called himself a true artist. Kang-min crouched against a thick rope stretched across the ruined carousel and calmly replied that a real artist never blamed his materials. Tears filled Sunj's eyes as he demanded what Kang-min meant. Rather than explain, Kang-min offered to show him. Both were thrown through the wreckage, tumbling past shattered beams. Sunj struggled against the force pulling him, calling the attack crude, predictable, and unoriginal as the chains tightened around his wrist. Suspended in the air, he mockingly asked how Kang-min thought his work looked so far. Looking down, Sunj suddenly noticed the pattern beneath him and recognized it as the ninth circle magic spell, Meteor. Standing beside a massive iron cylinder, Kang-min explained that he had taken the sorrow of the dead horse and sublimated it into the magic circle. Sunj dismissed the explanation as childish nonsense that ruined his artistic sense, though he remained uneasy as he insisted the true value of the piece was only beginning. Struggling against the fixed pole, Sunj complained that it wouldn't move because it had been bolted down too tightly. Kang-min shielded his eyes and looked upward with a faint smile, remarking that it was coming. A massive cannon barrel swung into view. Sunj's eyes widened as the word meteor rang out. A powerful beam of light crashed down from above, obliterating the ground and sending rubble and dust in every direction. The carousel was reduced to twisted beams and shattered glass, leaving a deep crater behind. Kang-min called the scene unpleasant and mocked Sunj for daring to call such destruction art. Cracking his fingers, he offered to teach Sunj a lesson. Suspended among the ruined machinery, Sunj insisted that the destruction proved how beautiful art could be. Blood ran from a fresh wound near his eye. A small bark interrupted him. A fluffy white puppy tugged at Kang-min's pant leg, drawing Sunj's attention. Confused by the little dog, Sunj asked if it was some kind of toy. Kang-min turned and briefly apologized as the puppy yipped beside him, then asked Sunj to repeat what he had just said. Kang-min calmly walked out of a gift shop labeled Welcoming, carrying a small heart-shaped item. He explained that he had been searching for tools and hadn't heard Sunj clearly. Despite the blood on his face, Sunj hardened his expression and declared that it was an eye for an eye, art for art. Kang-min clicked a strange wand-like device covered in hearts and stars. He remarked that people always claimed art became better when it was flashier. Sunj's eyes widened in disbelief at what he was seeing. Kang-min stood transformed, with a glittering tiara on his head, declaring that they would start over with blinding brilliance. The wand pulsed before releasing a brilliant burst of light, transforming into something far more radiant and powerful. He raised the glowing weapon beside his face and declared that it contained enough magic to annihilate the evil demonic tribe, along with all kinds of other features. Sunj pressed a bloodied finger to his lips and dismissed the display as too childish to watch. From a distance, he questioned whether Kang-min seriously intended to fight with such a weapon. Kang-min calmly reminded him that a true master never blames his tools. Sunj laughed, claiming Kang-min understood nothing. He explained that the greater a master became, the more sensitive they became toward the tools they used. A thin red line curved across the ground as Sunj extended his fingers. Threads began weaving around his hands, forming a custom tool built entirely for himself. Kang-min groaned as light spilled from beneath his jacket, complaining about how awkwardly the weapon had to be pulled from his clothes and noting that the material holding it was no ordinary fabric. Examining the heart-shaped wand, he found it delicate like a brush, yet sharp like a chisel. A red thread sliced through the air and cleanly cut a nearby statue, as if it were clay. Kang-min's eyes narrowed in surprise. The thread then curved around a thick stone pillar, confirming that it was anything but ordinary. Sunja's eyes gleamed as he announced that he would sculpt next, his fingers already guiding more threads outward. The wand's crystal heart shimmered as energy gathered inside it. Kang-min activated the weapon and called out its name, Prism Heart Bubble. Glowing bubbles burst from the wand's core and struck Sunj directly in the eyes. He screamed in pain, clawing at his face. Kang-min tilted his head, mildly amused, wondering whether the weapon actually worked as advertised before declaring that they would wipe out the evil demonic tribe with holy bubbles. Sunj wiped furiously at his face, complaining that cheap chemicals were ruining his skin before freezing, when he noticed something strange. Kang-min spun around and realized Sunj had disappeared, demanding to know where he had gone and whether he had simply run away. Studying the wand, Kang-min admitted that its handling was undeniably top tier. Sunj had mastered two opposite combat styles, heavy attacks driven by chains and precise cuts using thin threads, requiring exceptional technique. However, his basic fieldcraft remained flawed, particularly his ability to track opponents using concealment and cover. Kang-min carefully studied the area and concluded that he had assessed the level of this so-called network killer. A distant silhouette stood against the fading light as Kang-min decided it was time to finish things. His eyes widened when he noticed something strange. A nearly invisible red thread curved across his shoulder. He wondered whether the mark had been there all along. Sunj's face appeared beside him with a faint smile, remarking that calling it an eyesore was a little harsh. Something small and fast shot behind Kang-min and struck toward Sunj's chest. Sunj grinned despite the impact and revealed that what had been hit was only a training dummy. Kang-min's gaze turned cold. He explained that the dummy existed to help Sunj shape the masterpiece he would soon become. Threads wrapped tightly around Sunj's fingers as he promised that Kang-min's corpse would follow, announcing his finishing move. Tears filled his eyes as he claimed the spell could put the demonic tribe to sleep with a single strike, though he began wondering where the strange sound around him was coming from. Kang-min's wand ignited beside him as he called out Prism Silent Guillotine. Blood sprayed across the sky as the attack struck. Sunja's mangled face twisted in agony as he demanded to know how it felt. Fury mixing with his pain, Kang-min remained unimpressed, asking whether Sunj intended to keep talking about masterpieces and art. Sunj staggered forward with blood soaking through his sleeve before breaking into a desperate scream and fleeing. Kang-min watched silently as an enormous iron structure creaked overhead, its platform swaying from rusted chains. He entered an old arcade building with a faded neon sign. Inside, rows of broken machines lined the dim hallway as he considered his next move. Blood streaked across the arcade floor, with red threads crossing the tiles like a spider's web. Kang-min calmly remarked that Sunj had run away rather desperately. Kang-min reflected that dying was terrifying even for someone who had made a living around death. His thoughts drifted to the rusting iron structures around them, considering how even metal eventually decayed. He then stood over a blond man kneeling before him. The man panted heavily, sweat and blood matting his hair, while a thick red cord tightened around his throat. Death, he thought, moved slowly rather than striking all at once, gradually pulling life away like a tide drawing sand back into the sea. The cord around the man's neck seemed to represent that connection between life and death, stretching thinner without ever truly breaking. The blond man's expression sharpened as he questioned where Kang-min's sudden thoughts were going. Kang-min stepped closer, his footsteps echoing across the tiles. The kneeling man lifted his head and taunted him for apparently switching careers from artist to philosopher. Despite the blood on his lips, his smile widened. He shook his head and calmly corrected him. "No, this is inspiration." From behind, the cord tightened around the blond man's neck like a noose pulled by an invisible hand. Standing at death's door, the blond man admitted that a realization had suddenly struck him. Instead of allowing death to drag him under, he decided to pull death toward himself. He knelt beneath a single beam of light, gathering the remaining strength in his battered body. Above the old arcade, a rusted mechanical arm creaked against the gray sky. The cracked arcade zone sign hung overhead while dozens of taut wires stretched from the structure toward the ground. Red threads pulled tightly around the ride's claws as they groaned under the strain. The blond man wondered what would happen if, rather than waiting for death, he brought death to himself. Kang-min stood over him with his arms loose at his sides, unimpressed by his rambling. He remarked that the blood loss must have made the man talk even more nonsense than usual. The blond man smirked through the blood on his lips and told Kang-min to think whatever he wanted. A tattooed hand rose, strange symbols covering the fingers as red threads crossed each knuckle. He insisted that regardless of what Kang-min believed, everything would change from that moment onward. Meeting Kang-min's eyes, he calmly declared that Kang-min couldn't escape. Kang-min's brow furrowed as the man's body suddenly tensed. Muscles strained against the countless threads wrapped around him as he pulled with everything he had left. Above them, a massive structure shifted. Kang-min's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. This was the man's dying work. Blood ran down the blond man's chin as he coughed and laughed through the pain, calling it his greatest masterpiece. Looking upward through the rain and blood, he calmly asked Kang-min if he could hear it. Above them, a rusted iron beam groaned under years of damage. Bolts began popping loose, one after another, until the entire structure started losing its balance, held together by only a handful of threads. Kang-min strained against the red threads wrapped around his limbs, clenching his fists and trying to force his arms forward, but the strands refused to break. He questioned how the threads could be so strong. Unable to move, Kang-min realized he was trapped in an inescapable web of threads, with two killers bound together in a struggle where only one could survive. Yet despite the danger, something about the scene kept his attention. A massive iron claw swung loose from the tower as gears ground against each other, descending toward the arcade entrance. Kang-min's eyes widened. Despite the danger, he found the scene beautiful. Wanting to understand the meaning behind the man's work, he asked what the masterpiece was called. Rain and blood ran down the blond man's face as he gave a broken smile, embracing death. The two remained locked together within the tangled threads as the ceiling began collapsing around them. Concrete broke loose, and the massive iron claw finally tore free from its mount. Debris rained down as the entire arcade came apart, yet the two figures remained locked together while everything around them collapsed. The sky later turned warm orange over the ruins. Broken statues and shattered fragments covered the old stone ground where the arcade once stood. A young man in a hoodie stood among the rubble, confused by what he was seeing. He was certain the arcade had been there only moments earlier, but now almost nothing remained except dust, broken stone, and the cracked arcade zone sign half buried nearby. A light brown-haired young man stood near the ruins, studying them with an unreadable expression. He quietly reflected on choosing death, describing it as something decided in the middle of a fight for survival. He turned toward the horizon and considered how art was ultimately difficult to understand, layered with meanings that were never easy to grasp. Beside him, Kang-min lit a cigarette as smoke drifted into the fading light. The brown-haired man glanced over and asked whether Kang-min agreed with him. Kang-min exhaled calmly, admitting he didn't know and joking that lighting a cigarette had somehow been harder than everything that had just happened. He asked if the man had a lighter, then declined an offer of candy, saying sugar was bad for him. Standing among the fallen rocks, Kang-min stated that he had done exactly what they asked. The brown-haired man turned back with a faint smile and agreed, acknowledging that Kang-min had followed the instructions perfectly. A brief memory showed Kang-min holding a large spoon and being told to take a big scoop of something sweet before he could join them. A carnival sign reading Magic Cupcake stood against the evening sky, surrounded by enormous pastries arranged like attractions. Kang-min stared at the sight with genuine appreciation, admitting that it looked delicious. Bound tightly in red threads, the blonde artist lay sprawled across a giant plate beneath an enormous spoon. He stared at his situation in disbelief and weakly muttered the word pudding. Even as his consciousness faded, his thoughts remained fixed on what mattered most to him, his art, and the posthumous work he would leave behind. The brown-haired man pressed his palms together, relief visible in his expression. He passed. He extended his hand toward Kang-min with a confident smile, explaining that from then on the network would guarantee Kang-min's safety, but that protection came with a price. Whoever needed to be eliminated, he would personally handle. Kang-min's eyes narrowed at the weight behind the promise. The young man's expression hardened as he repeated that it didn't matter who the target was. Encrypted audio waveforms appeared on a laptop, showing 3 signals labeled Target A, Target B, and Target C. Among the intercepted data, one line stood out. He liked pudding. Later, Kang-min sat in a dim room with a cigarette between his lips, opening one cup of pudding after another. Someone remarked that he wasn't a child, but Kang-min shrugged and muttered that he was starting his childhood now. Across from him, an operative sat before a corkboard covered with photographs, notes, and connecting threads. Another agent admitted that Kang-min looked nothing like the Lee San they had imagined. Memories showed Kang-min fooling around in the back of a car, laughing like an overgrown teenager. It was difficult to reconcile that image with the man now sitting quietly with his palms pressed together. Yet this supposedly childish man was believed to lead a contract-killing organization. The laptop remained open inside its case as the investigators continued studying him. Kang-min lacked the scent of blood normally associated with hired killers, and carried none of the intimidating presence expected from an organization's leader. A close-up settled on his narrowed eyes beneath dark hair. Despite everything, something about him remained unmistakably wrong. A woman with her hair tied back turned slightly and stated that suspicion alone wasn't enough. Circumstantial evidence couldn't confirm anything. They needed physical proof that this man was truly Lee San and not someone using his identity. A drawer opened under the dim light. The proof had already been handed over without Kang-min realizing it. The others stared in disbelief as fragments of the earlier scene came together, a glass with leftover liquid, a hand near someone's mouth, and a spoon held between the fingers of a suited man. The spoon wasn't an ordinary prop. It contained a secured sample carrying Kang-min's DNA. The preserved spoon was revealed inside the drawer. One investigator called the situation careless before reconsidering. Perhaps Kang-min wasn't careless at all. Perhaps he simply didn't care about protecting himself. Either way, without a genuine DNA sample from Lee Sand for comparison, the test would accomplish nothing. Then someone remembered a favor that had been requested earlier. Elsewhere, a woman in a tailored vest walked through an ornate corridor, informing someone that most of the necessary procedures were already complete. She approached massive engraved doors marked with a golden bee, adding that only approval from the highest command remained. The doors groaned open, their metal echoing through the hall. Once that approval came through, everything else would follow immediately. Facing forward with a sharp, determined expression, she stated that she would send it to Korea herself. By a quiet harbor, lined with docked boats beneath a starry sky, two men stood facing each other. One asked whether the promised item had been brought, and the other confirmed it without hesitation. The older gray-haired man admitted he had pushed himself to prepare everything ahead of schedule, deliberately timing it to coincide with the World Summit, which was only 2 days away in South Korea. A briefcase clicked open under the lamplight, revealing something that made the long-haired man in the gray suit smile approvingly. He praised how quickly it had been completed and declared it excellent. His expression sharpened as he explained the plan. Whatever was inside the case would allow them to bypass the heavy security surrounding the summit venue, giving them direct access to the presidents of every nation attending. The scene shifted to a plate inside an oven where rows of glistening octopus skewers were prepared. A voice introduced them as live octopus tangulu, meant to be served at the banquet. On a phone screen, a promotional post asked whether the dish could win over the palates of world leaders, inviting viewers to comment octopus for a delivery coupon. A thumb typed the word as the caption revealed that a famous actor was promoting the campaign. The feed suddenly shifted to a young idol trainee posing on a staircase, labeled the hottest rising star of the moment. Likes and shares steadily climbed until a warning appeared, announcing that screen time had exceeded 13 hours. He stared in disbelief, realizing he had spent the entire stretch cycling through short videos until his fingers went numb. Sprawled across a couch with his phone on his stomach, he sighed that another day had passed doing nothing but taking up space and burning oxygen. Sitting up, his mood worsened as he complained about the people from Network, irritated that they still had not contacted him. Evening settled over a quiet street as a delivery notification confirmed that his live octopus tangulu had arrived, 5 skewers at a discounted price. Walking alone in a rumpled suit with his tie loosened, he wondered if he had somehow been fired before even starting the job, and joked about reporting the company for fraud to the labor ministry. Near a small guardhouse, he paused and straightened his collar before realizing the problem. Since he was now trying to contact them, he had no way to do so. The business card he had received contained no phone number, email, or other contact information. Later, with the delivery bag swinging from his hand, he grew impatient, muttering that whatever was supposed to happen should arrive as quickly as food delivery. Lifting the bag, he noticed how light it felt and immediately suspected he had forgotten to include the chocolate clam bingsu. He checked the receipt, squinting as he tried to remember the exact name of the extra item. Instead, strange numbers, a garbled phrase, and an error message covered the paper. Confused, he initially wondered whether the printer had malfunctioned. Then the pieces began to fit together. The label identified the numbers as ASCII code, revealing that the plain text had deliberately been converted into hexadecimal to disguise it. Holding the strip up to the light, he studied the coded message and recognized that it was intentional. A circular emblem was faintly stamped beneath the encoded numbers. The message identified itself clearly, a communication from Network. Walking home with the delivery bag in one hand, he studied the code again, noting how tedious the encryption method seemed before wondering if it had been designed that way specifically to prevent tracing. He pieced the numbers together one pair at a time, quietly translating them until the message began to make sense. Standing before a keypad, he realized he needed a proper converter to finish decoding it. A thumbs up appeared behind him as another set of eyes watched silently. The door lock concealed a specific security mechanism. When a card passed over the surface, invisible magnetic powder transferred onto its edge. Purple fingerprints appeared wherever the keys were pressed, ensuring that anyone entering would leave evidence regardless of their method. An ordinary burglar would never go through such exhausting precautions. A blade rested above a pair of discarded shoes, while every detail had been arranged to avoid leaving signs of forced entry. Fingers tightened around a hooked knife. This was simply how a professional operated. In a dim, red-tinted room, he wondered where they could be hiding. With the bag in hand and the blade concealed, he reasoned that eating the tanghulu would help relieve the stress from schoolwork, though his real purpose remained unclear. He moved silently through the cramped house, checking every corner. Catching the smell of food, he decided to change quickly before eating. The living room and kitchen were already clear. A door opened slightly, revealing a single eye as the laundry room and bathroom were checked as well. He stood at the bedroom entrance, examining the untouched wardrobe and drawers. Peering through another narrow gap, he wondered where he had left his tablet, muttering that he could not eat without YouTube playing in the background. Suddenly, he lunged forward with his blade. He checked a small room filled with hanging clothes, found nothing, and continued down the hallway. With no sign that anyone had gone toward the basement, he concluded that the hiding place had to be elsewhere. Then his eye sharpened at the sound of running water. He stopped before the bathroom door, immediately suspecting that the noise was deliberately meant to expose someone's position. Recognizing it as a fixed-angle ambush, he understood the tactic. Lure the target in with sound or light, then strike from a blind spot based on the door's expected opening angle. From above, the setup was obvious. The attacker would wait outside the predicted entry point and strike the instant the door opened. Undeterred, he approached the bathroom and decided on a countermeasure. Gripping the doorknob, he prepared to wrench the door open in the opposite direction. With his blade raised, he planned to strike the chest immediately, then follow up on the lower body. Instead, his foot caught on something. A bar of soap sent him sliding across the floor. He lost his balance and crashed backward onto the tiles, ending up sprawled awkwardly with a dazed grin. A startled voice came through the steam, demanding to know why he was there. He could only respond with a confused sound. Beneath an ornate chandelier, a voice quietly confirmed that word had arrived. They were now in South Korea. The blonde woman looked upward, adding that the two had probably already crossed paths. Facing an empty desk, she noted that thanks to someone's swift approval, everything had progressed smoothly. An old rotary phone sat on the desk, connected to whoever held the title of General Manager. She mentioned two operatives by code, Spade A and Heart 3, standing alone in the grand hall. She reflected on the unprecedented pairing of two of the organization's finest, sent together to hunt an unidentified target. A voice over the phone asked whether she believed they would succeed. After a brief pause, she admitted that based purely on their individual abilities, she had no doubts, estimating a 99% chance of success. The remaining 1%, however, depended entirely on how well the two could work together. Meanwhile, the dark-haired man remained sprawled on the bathroom floor, amused by the situation. He explained that he had mistaken the noise for an intruder and been genuinely startled, then remembered that he had recently requested backup from Batala. Sitting up, he greeted the woman in broken English. She replied in kind, introducing herself as Heart 3, while continuing to rinse herself under the water. With a faint smirk, she teased him for dramatically breaking down the door just to get inside, asking whether he had missed her that much. Heart 3 was a casino dealer and support agent operating from Hotel Batala, operated through a card-based system. Its 53 trained killers were ranked like a deck, each contractor assigned a suit and number reflecting their skill and standing. At the top stood the ace of spades, Ryu Kang-min, a composed killer whose calm exterior concealed exceptional precision. Elsewhere, a single card rested sealed inside a glass case, representing contractors kept in reserve until they were needed. Not every card served as a direct combatant. Some worked as support agents, operating behind the scenes to keep field contractors alive and undetected. Disguised as a government secretary, Kang-min entered a grand estate and was politely greeted by a man unaware that death had just crossed his doorstep. Meanwhile, Franklin Villard, founder of the trafficking empire known as Zoli, sat inside a car, unaware that Batala had already marked him for elimination. Miles away, a support agent monitored the operation through a wall of screens. Her fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard as she maintained Kang-min's flawless forged identity. Through counterfeit documents, disguises, digital infiltration, and chemical analysis, he had gained access that an ordinary visitor could never obtain. Walking beside Villard through the estate, Kang casually remarked that nothing had changed. Beyond the surrounding forest, a distant cathedral stood untouched, contrasting sharply with the violence about to unfold inside. Back at her station, the support agent tracked the target as he moved deeper into the building. Advanced technology manipulated light and projected images, creating an optical camouflage system that deceived the security cameras. Every feed showed normal activity. Even so, Villard noticed a faint movement or shadow that seemed out of place. Before he could understand what he had seen, it was already too late. Behind her monitors, Batala's greatest support specialist continued guiding Kang-min through the estate, her expression unreadable as she controlled the operation from the shadows. Later, at a quiet safe house, Kang-min finds himself in the kitchen with Heart 3, the tension of the mission replaced by a more casual atmosphere. She teases him about rushing her out of the shower, implying that his urgency had another reason. Growing impatient, Kang-min cuts through the teasing with a direct demand. The mood shifts into comedy when Kang-min raises a live octopus tongkulu and threatens to shove it in her face. She immediately fires back with a threat of her own, revealing the lighter, almost domestic side of their relationship. Back at the safe house, Kang-min teases her about her strange eating habits, pointing out that she still makes soybean paste pasta after training and sneaks into his room to throw it away, proving that her stubbornness has not changed. She gives him a sharp look and tells him that if he planned to visit, he should have warned her instead of trespassing. Kang-min explains that he avoided telling her because even briefly stepping outside is troublesome for her. She asks whether something happened that required such precautions. After hesitating, she admits that men constantly approach her and ask for her number. Kang-min remarks flatly that repeatedly turning them down must be exhausting. She adds that the attention has become noticeably worse lately, sounding more irritated than flattered. Elsewhere, a woman walks through an elegant hallway and mentions that her sister told her Kang-min successfully secured the target's DNA during his last operation. He confirms it, explaining that this is why he is handing the DNA profiling to her. She reminds him that raw DNA cannot identify someone by itself. It must be compared against a verified reference sample. Until Kang-min provides that sample, there is nothing more she can do. Stretching, she decides to treat the downtime as a vacation and plans to go shopping. Kang-min immediately stops her, holding up a sheet of paper and asking who gave her permission to leave. He explains that Batala would never assign such a capable support agent to a single simple task, implying that more work is coming. Right on cue, a new network directive arrives. The message is scrambled and corrupted, with encryption errors obscuring its contents. Kang-min recalls finally decoding it and admits that what he discovered genuinely shocked him. The scene shifts to a cathedral filled with colorful stained glass light. The voice reveals that the new target is someone unexpected and holds significant power and influence. An older, hardened man bites down on a cigar while a knife presses dangerously close to his throat. He asks through gritted teeth whether his attacker intends to keep going. Inside the cathedral, the older man faces a young swordsman. The young fighter suddenly lunges forward, angrily questioning how the old man can remain so calm during a deadly confrontation. Their swords collide with force, but the older man effortlessly deflects the attack. He tells the young fighter that he clearly does not understand his position in this battle. He explains that in their line of work, being called old means something very different from what people assume. Without warning, he fires a concealed shot at the young killer, calmly remarking that surviving this long is what being old truly represents. The bullet shatters the stained glass window behind them, sending colored shards raining into the cathedral as the fight continues. The young killer collapses to his knees, wounded and struggling, while the old man explains that surviving countless attacks from other killers is what proves true experience and skill. Standing over him with his sword raised, the old man calls him an ignorant fool for underestimating his opponent. His identity is revealed as Kim Yong-soo, whose brutal presence hides behind a completely different public image. The scene suddenly cuts to reveal that the entire confrontation was a film shoot. Cameras and lighting equipment surround the set, showing that the fight was only part of a movie. In reality, Kim Yong-soo is a beloved national actor known for his charity work and trustworthy public image. He founded his own entertainment agency, continues acting, and mentors younger actors entering the industry. Back at Batala's base, the support agent studies his profile with mild surprise, noting how unusual such a target is for them. She wonders why an actor would be targeted at all, even suggesting that an obsessive anti-fan might have ordered the hit. Kang-min calls the celebrity target a headache. Managers, bodyguards, and paparazzi make approaching him difficult, while his death would attract enormous public attention and trigger a serious investigation. Still, none of that changes the assignment. Kang-min leans back, relieved to discover that the mission is easier than expected because killing Kim Yong-soo is not the objective. The decrypted directive reveals that he must infiltrate a specific location in Seoul and retrieve an item currently in Kim Yong-soo's possession. Kang-min explains that all he needs to do is take the item from Kim Yong-soo's safe. The plan itself is simple, but he lacks the necessary equipment. The support agent surprises him by revealing that she has already prepared everything. In a hidden room filled with security monitors, she shows him what she considers the necessary equipment: an industrial-grade fiber laser marker, a resin 3D printer, and a high-end workstation. Kang-min questions whether such equipment is excessive for breaking into an office. She explains that entertainment agencies maintain strict security because of Sasaeng fans and constant information leaks. Kim Yong-soo's private office is especially secure, locked behind a system requiring his personal authentication. The only way inside is for Kim Yong-soo himself to open the door. Kang-min realizes they need a disguised identity that Kim Yong-soo would trust enough to let inside, such as a secretary or janitor. He remarks that creating such an identity should be as easy for her as ordering food. She admits that it normally would be, but refuses because the request falls outside her responsibilities. Her standing order is to support anything directly related to Lee San's identity, while unrelated requests are not her concern. Kang-min reminds her that she had planned to treat him to an unlimited shopping spree after everything was finished. She questions whether that is really how things will go. He pulls out a sleek black card and offers it as a reward for helping with the mission. Convinced, she reluctantly agrees, admitting that she has little choice but to help him. Night falls over the city. Towering buildings glow against the dark sky as the mission begins. Through a hidden earpiece, the support agent confirms the connection and explains that the building ahead is Y Entertainment, the agency founded by Kim Yong-soo. Reaching the chairman's office normally requires 3 security checkpoints. The first requires identity verification and a visitor log. The second is a security gate accessible only with a pre-screened access card. The final barrier is the chairman's private elevator, which requires Kim Yong-soo's personal authorization. Yet Kang-min stands inside the elevator, remarking that despite the building's security, he walked straight through using nothing but his face. Pulling back his hood, he reveals that he has perfectly disguised himself as Kim Yong-soo. A guard recognizes him immediately, unaware that the supposed chairman is actually Kang-min returning from a hiking trip. Kang-min notes that posing as a janitor would have been far too basic for this job. His only remaining obstacle is the biometric scanner. But something already feels wrong. When they reach the chairman's office, the door opens by itself. The security system has already been disabled from inside. The man in hiking gear cautiously enters and immediately senses something strange. Inside, he finds a body with his exact face lying motionless on the floor. Examining the wound, he recognizes a clean, precise cut that severed an artery and caused fatal blood loss. The attack was clearly carried out by a professional contractor. Gripping a sharpened pen, he prepares to use it as a weapon and turns toward the shadows, confronting the mysterious killer hiding nearby. The situation has now become a confrontation between the real Kim Yong-soo and the contractor who came to steal from him. Meanwhile, the Liam Art Museum stands against Seoul's skyline beneath the afternoon light. A green banner announces a charity auction featuring the famous actor Kim Yong-soo. Inside, guests fill the auditorium as cameras focus on the stage. The host welcomes everyone before Kim Yong-soo explains that the event will showcase rare pieces from his private collection, with all proceeds going toward children battling cancer. The first item is presented under a warm spotlight, a 19th-century Swiss singing bird music box with golden birds suspended above delicate clockwork. Kim Yong-soo recalls purchasing it in Switzerland during a film shoot years earlier. His thoughts then return to fellow actor Baek Ji-hoon, who took him into the city after filming ended that night despite knowing how exhausted he was. Looking back, Kim Yong-soo considers the encounter a stroke of luck. At the antique shop Ji-hoon dragged him to, he discovered the rare treasure now displayed before the crowd, crafted from 18-karat gold and decorated with diamonds and rubies. The moment is interrupted when a hooded figure steps from the shadows near the display case. Noting that the auction is still underway, he pulls the pin from a canister and explains that, since this is a charity auction, he has come to collect some charity of his own. Smoke immediately spreads through the room as the masked intruder continues his threat. News reports later confirm that robbers armed with smoke bombs attacked the charity auction honoring Kim Yong-soo. Kim Yong-soo tells reporters he is relieved that no one was injured. Investigators reveal that the robbers used the smoke as cover to target the collection, but were subdued before escaping. The auction is halted, and the recovered pieces are scheduled to be transferred to Kim Yong-soo's personal safe for protection. Elsewhere, a gray-haired man examines a body slumped across a couch. Studying the wound, he identifies the cause of death as a severed carotid artery, noting that the bleeding was too severe for the victim to survive. The clean, precise incision confirms that the killer was experienced, leading him to suspect a professional contractor rather than an amateur. A fountain pen catches the light as a voice reluctantly confirms that suspicion. The older man then faces a masked figure holding the pen like a blade and quietly refers to him as a mysterious killer. With the pen near his throat, the masked man warns him that intimidation could be handled more effectively. The older man suddenly deflects the attack, sending the pen flying, and points out that if killing had truly been the intention, the attacker would have struck a vital point without hesitation. The two immediately clash, exchanging fists and blades in the confined room. The masked figure lunges again, his pen cutting through the air as his red eyes remain fixed on his opponent. The older man studies his movements and recognizes the fluid, calculated technique of someone with formal training. Yet, despite that skill, something about his opponent doesn't add up. He noted that, despite the polished technique, the strikes themselves seemed aimless, lacking any clear target or intent, as though the attacker were holding back or simply unsure of what to do. Grunting as another blow landed, the older man braced himself, preparing to turn the defense into an opening for retaliation. A quieter memory surfaced. A pen tapped lightly beside a watching eye before another voice instructed him simply to close the lid once he was finished. Startled by the strange instruction, his expression shifted into confusion, the pen resting near his cheek. Smoke curled from the cigarette between his teeth as he admitted that the darkness made it impossible to see the other man's face clearly. He then asked whether things really needed to escalate this far. Back in the fight, blades sliced through the air in overlapping strike. Amid the chaos, the masked attacker unexpectedly admitted that he had no real interest in killing Kim Yong-soo. After a brief silence, he explained that there was something specific he wanted to understand. Grabbing the older man by the collar, he demanded to know why the target had been killed in the first place. The older man suddenly spun around, scanning the wreckage as he realized his opponent had disappeared. A burst of white light tore through the darkness as the masked figure launched a devastating aerial strike. When the attack ended, a blade clattered onto the floor. The older man looked around with a hint of amusement and remarked that his opponent was terrible at holding a conversation, adding that he had expected him to be the avoidant type. Beyond the shattered window, jagged pieces of glass remained where the attacker had escaped. The older man studied the damage and remarked that risking one's life simply to avoid talking to him was taking things to another level. Elsewhere, the fleeing man caught his breath and admitted that even he could barely keep up with the opponent's speed. This was clearly no ordinary contractor. He tugged at his jacket zipper and muttered that if he had known things would turn out this way, he never would have made the choices that brought him here. Opening his shirt, he revealed an unnaturally padded torso and groaned at his own poor planning. He had been wearing 50 kilograms of silicone special effects makeup and should have removed it before the fight. Meanwhile, a luxury boutique stood beneath a wide-open sky, its shelves filled with designer bags beneath warm showroom light. Inside a fitting room, a pale-haired woman posed playfully in a green dress and asked for an opinion before rejecting it herself because it had no pocket. She tried on another outfit, denim shorts that had nothing but pockets, and jokingly dismissed those as well. Next, she stepped out wearing a white halter dress and spun around, asking whether she looked ready for an awards show. When the man watching remained unimpressed, she complained that he seemed to dislike everything she tried on. Lounging on the couch, he dismissed her frustration, comparing his judgment to that of a father choosing clothes for his daughter. He then turned to the store clerk and told her to bring out everything they had, promising they would buy it all. The clerk hurried away enthusiastically, declaring that this would surely make her employee of the month. Once they were alone, the man's tone changed completely. He asked whether she had obtained the CCTV footage from the previous night. She teased him about suddenly switching back to business before explaining that the hitman had personally destroyed both the CCTV storage system and every backup on site. His expression tightened. Since everything had been stored locally with no cloud backup, recovering the footage was impossible. As she continued speaking, he quietly observed how thorough she was in everything she did, the compliment carrying a hint of suspicion. The clerk soon returned, proudly explaining that she had taken pieces reserved for other customers without hesitation. The man simply reaffirmed the arrangement, telling her they would buy everything she brought and urging her to keep the selections coming. The pale-haired woman responded with an excited cheer. Later, alone with his thoughts, the young man murmured as the pieces began to connect. His mind returned to the auction house robbery from several days earlier. News footage showed smoke bombs, police tape, and Kim Yong-soo telling reporters that he was relieved no one had been hurt. Another broadcast reported that the person responsible for Kim Yong-soo's death might also be targeting the rest of his private collection. The blonde woman immediately focused on the collection, but reasoned that before asking about it, she first needed to identify the killer. The young man in the hoodie calmly interrupted her, saying that he already knew who the killer was. She stared at him in disbelief, asking how he could possibly know when the CCTV footage had been destroyed. He explained that he had hidden a camera of his own. The tiny lens was revealed, concealed inside the zipper pull of a jacket. She scolded him for not mentioning it earlier, then laughed as she admitted that she had even gone as far as taking clothes directly from the store staff while preparing everything for him. Her expression soon turned serious. "Do you want to know who the killer is?" he answered without hesitation. "Of course." A finger pointed towards someone across the room. The store clerk followed the gesture, her face lighting up with recognition before her expression shifted into surprise. The young man politely asked her to step aside for a moment. The truth was then revealed. Actor Baek Ji-hoon was responsible for Kim Yong-soo's death. Elsewhere, a coded message circulated between contacts instructing anyone who commented the word octopus to receive a food delivery coupon. The strange signal connected two seemingly unrelated figures. Back at the boutique, the clerk enthusiastically called out that she had more clothes to bring over. The man on the couch could hardly believe how eagerly she was gathering stock from every branch she could reach. The blonde woman remained focused on the discovery. The movements captured in the footage clearly belonged to a professional contractor, yet the killer was supposedly an actor. The contradiction made little sense. Still, the pieces gradually fell into place. Baek Ji-hoon and Kim Yong-soo had jointly owned a safe where their shared collection was stored. If the safe belonged to both of them, then Baek Ji-hoon would know exactly where it was. She added that the two men must have shared a particularly close relationship. Kim Yong-soo had no children of his own and had apparently treated Baek Ji-hoon like a son. At the memorial, whispers spread among the mourners. Two men observed Baek Ji-hoon from a distance, noting that the man who had raised him like a son had just died. Yet Baek Ji-hoon appeared strangely calm. One of them wondered whether the long-standing rumors about tension between the two men had been true after all. Baek Ji-hoon stood silently before Kim Yong-soo's memorial photograph showing no visible grief. Then a single tear slipped down his cheek. A memory surfaced. A man knelt in the woods, bound and trembling as he begged for his life. He promised to remain silent and even swore that he would devote himself to writing favorable articles if he were spared. Then he recognized the man standing before him, Kim Yong-soo. Kim Yong-soo remained expressionless as he explained that the man had left him no choice. He possessed evidence connecting Kim Yong-soo to money laundering through a charity auction and illegal lobbying, evidence capable of destroying him. Desperate to survive, the kneeling man promised to destroy every piece of evidence himself if Kim Yong-soo would only let him live. Kim Yong-soo simply replied that the offer was unnecessary. The matter had already been handled. He revealed that he had hired someone else to deal with the problem before the man could even make his plea. A blade caught the faint light filtering through the trees as the killer stepped forward, making it clear that a professional contractor had already been assigned. Later, in a colder and more clinical setting, a masked evaluator delivered his verdict, confirming that the man before him had passed the test. Another voice praised his appearance, noting that his features suited the role and that his execution scene had been disturbingly convincing. The praise continued as the speaker expressed frustration with inexperienced actors who lacked the depth needed for difficult roles. This man, however, was different. He was perfect for the part. Reaching into his coat, the man produced a film script centered on a killer and called out to the stunned applicant. He then extended a business card bearing the name Y Entertainment and asked whether he had ever considered becoming an actor. Elsewhere, someone remained hidden behind a raised hand and dark hair, their expression obscured as they hesitated in thought. On a sunlit film set, a staff member wearing a cap asked whether the shoot should be postponed if Ji-hoon was struggling to continue. From inside a vehicle, a woman with her head bowed insisted that everything was fine despite how shaken she appeared. A long-haired man covering half his face pressed his palms together as a faint smile appeared. A voice told him that his emotions were perfect. The scene shifted to a grand traditional palace. Its dark tiled roof stretched beneath a bright sky as the production prepared for Scene 10, Take 1. Cameras and lighting equipment filled the courtyard. Kneeling on the stone floor in royal blue robes, a young man bowed before the king and begged him to grant his request. He spoke of the suffering people beyond the palace walls, describing poor subjects struggling simply to survive. Rising, he turned his back toward the throne and declared his intention to end the tyranny gripping the kingdom. Behind the camera, the weather director narrated the scene, describing a son desperately trying to believe that his father had once been kind. But as that hope faded, the crown prince finally broke and erupted in rage. Then something went off script. A confused sound escaped the actor. Behind him, a costumed figure wearing a wide black hat glanced toward the crown prince. Someone nearby immediately snapped that no one had ever dared challenge his majesty to a one-on-one duel. The man in black slowly drew his sword, condemning the act as a violation of heavenly ethics and an insult to the throne. Raising the blade, the executioner declared that such defiance would be punished with the utmost severity. The sword caught the sunlight above the kneeling actor's head. The young man narrowed his eyes without moving as he was coldly ordered to assume his position. The scene then revealed his identity. Ryu Kang-min. For the moment he was working as a part-time movie extra, and his role had just earned him a sentence of 300 strokes of flogging. His expression settled somewhere between disbelief and dry amusement. Later, Kang-min stood before a dim, book-lined study. The door opened, revealing a man waiting inside. "I'm the applicant for the part-time job posting." The atmosphere in the wooden room felt strangely heavy, making it clear that this was no ordinary interview. Behind the scenes, an online resume filled the screen. Kang-min entered his information with hesitant honesty. He had been born into a happy family. His fingers stopped. He then added the truth. He had been kidnapped as a child and sold to the Philippines. Back in a cramped apartment, a woman leaned over Kang-min's shoulder while eating a popsicle. She questioned why he needed a part-time job at all and teased him about his spending at the department store, dismissing the expense as pocket change. She remained close, humming curiously as she studied him, seemingly unaware of the world Kang-min was connected to. A casting notice then appeared on screen, advertising extras for a historical drama titled Usurpation. Kangpil Films was seeking background actors for the production, with applications open to anyone. A shadowed figure with a sharp smile questioned Kang-min's motive for taking the role. "Why go through all this trouble?" The suspicion in his voice suggested that the audition had far more behind it than a simple part-time job. Kang-min answered without hesitation, declaring that he would gladly take the part of an extra. His expression carried quiet confidence, as though the film set was exactly where he needed to be. On location, cameras and lighting rigs lined an old palace courtyard. The director's voice cut through the air, ordering someone to kneel and present themselves. Dressed as a nobleman in traditional robes, Kang-min faced punishment within the scene and was informed that he would receive 300 strokes of the cane. His calm expression betrayed no fear of the scripted brutality. The director suddenly erupted, screaming for the cameras to cut. Fury spread across his face as he shouted repeatedly, clearly displeased with how the scene had unfolded. Off-camera, the director rounded on a crew member, demanding to know what was wrong with the actor and accusing him of failing to manage the extras properly. The subordinate could only apologize, as another crew member was ordered to drag Kang-min away. Still in costume, Kang-min was pulled off the set by two staff members. He lamented the loss of his performance, insisting that he had poured his very soul into it and calling it true method acting, while the director screamed that extras were never supposed to have lines. A tattooed man nearby apologized on someone's behalf, promising that the scene would be reshot. A nervous crew member standing beside him nodded in agreement. Kang-min tilted his head as a faint sound caught his attention. His eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat, and something in the moment stirred quiet suspicion behind his otherwise composed expression. Flashes of violence bled into the frame, blades slicing through the air and men's faces twisted in fear. The chaos hinted at Kang-min's true nature breaking through the fabricated calm of the film set. His face darkened beneath the strands of hair covering it, his eyes narrowing further as an unspoken word escaped his lip. A tour bus sat parked beneath a wide sky, its door open and waiting. Inside, Kang-min sat alone, confused, as a voice ordered him to pack his things and leave immediately. He remained seated, demanding proper severance pay in accordance with labor law if he were truly being dismissed. A staff member scoffed, pointing out that 3 minutes of work hardly justified any kind of payout. The same man snapped back, shouting that Kang-min understood nothing about how the industry actually worked. Still fuming, the staff member reminded him that plenty of other people were available to replace him, revealing that production was already short one extra for the next scene. His words made clear how easily disposable everyone on set truly was. The chief grabbed the nearest crew member, warning that if one spot stayed empty, the director would empty his position too. Kang-min sat quietly in the back of the bus, unreadable, while panic flashed across the chief's face at the threat hanging over his own job. On set, a clapperboard marked the next scene, the Crown Prince facing a wave of assassins. Scene 21-3, cut 4, take 1 was called out as the crew prepared to roll. The clapperboard snapped shut, signaling the start of filming. The command to begin echoed across the courtyard, launching the cast into motion. Playing the Crown Prince, a young noble stared down at a document in his hands, questioning aloud whether it truly represented his father's final will. Doubt and disbelief colored his expression as the weight of the words sank in. A cloaked figure stood behind him, declaring that he had finally crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Around them, shadowed assassins closed in from every side of the palace courtyard. Surrounded on all directions, the Crown Prince stood alone, at the center of a tightening circle of blades. Dozens of assassins pressed closer, weapons drawn and ready to strike from every angle. He lashed out with his sword, shouting that his father had acted only out of fear, terrified of being remembered as a tyrant who would kill his own child. Rage fueled every strike as steel cut through the air. Another assassin fell beneath his blade, and he accused the king of orchestrating the massacre while planning to blame it on foreign invaders. His fury grew with each accusation, matched by the ferocity of his swordplay. He raised his blade before his face, eyes narrowed as he gathered focus before the next wave of attackers descended upon him. The moment carried the calm of a warrior fully committed to the fight ahead. He demanded to know whether so many assassins had truly been sent against him, disbelief cutting through his voice even as he cut down another attacker. Bodies dropped around him as the assault continued without pause. Dust and debris scattered through the air while blades clashed in rapid succession. Both fighters caught their breath after the brutal exchange, exhaustion settling over them. Behind the camera, the director praised the shot, calling it good before moving to the next setup. This one focused on a character staring toward the palace in the distance. A woman stood facing the palace grounds, remarking that if the prince had no intention of claiming the throne himself, someone else would need to act. Her tone carried quiet resolve rather than doubt. The crown prince responded, vowing that he would take that burden upon himself instead. His blade met an incoming strike as the words left his mouth, resolve hardening across his features. Swords locked together in a shower of sparks, the two combatants pressing against each other with equal force. Neither side gave ground as steel screeched against steel. Locked in the clash, the prince studied his opponent's face, recognition beginning to dawn even as their blades remained crossed. The question of identity hung unspoken between them. Off to the side, the director's face twisted in shock, his mouth falling open mid-sentence as something unexpected unfolded before him. Whatever he witnessed had clearly deviated from the script. Kang-min appeared again, sword raised, recognized instantly by his opponent as the bodyguard who kept resurfacing despite every attempt to remove him. His expression carried quiet amusement at being called out. The chief tore off his beanie in frustration, shouting that his career had been ruined because of this extra's repeated interference. Beside him, the director paused mid-thought, suddenly reconsidering the situation. Blades collided once more in a burst of light and motion, the clash echoing across the set as both fighters pushed against each other with full force. The scene closed with their weapons locked, neither willing to yield. The tattooed swordsman studied his opponent's face, recognition flashing through his eyes as he confirmed this was the same person he had encountered before. His grip on the blade behind his shoulder tightened as the memory settled in. Kang-min turned to face him fully, admitting the truth with a confident smirk. He was indeed the same man who had disguised himself as the target the swordsman believed he had already killed. Off to the side, a nervous staff member offered to remove him from the scene immediately, worried about the disruption. The director, half his face hidden in shadow, refused and ordered the cameras to keep rolling instead. A woman standing nearby reacted with alarm to something unseen, demanding to know what he meant. Her glasses reflected an eerie white glow as she insisted she could hear something building, repeating the words with mounting urgency. The director rose behind her, his face swallowed in darkness except for the reflection off his glasses, declaring that the creative monster within him was awakening with an unprecedented roar. Light burst from his open jacket as his obsession consumed him. Leaves drifted across the sky as the director whispered that this particular scene would, without question, become a masterpiece. His confidence carried through the quiet, wind-blown moment. Kang-min lunged forward with his blade, sparks exploding around him as steel met steel in a furious exchange. The director declared that the moment would be forever engraved in the history of film. The swordsman pressed his blade against Kang-min's, expressing quiet suspicion about how he kept appearing out of nowhere at exactly the wrong moments. The tension between them sharpened with every clash. Airborne and locked in combat, the swordsman demanded to know exactly what Kang-min thought he was doing. Suspicion was evident beneath his controlled exterior as neither fighter eased their grip while they spun through the air. Behind the camera, the boom operator worried aloud that the sword swings looked too wild, fearing someone would get hurt. The younger crew member reassured him that it was only a prop, insisting nothing dangerous could happen with a fake blade. Upside down mid-strike, Kang-min noted that since his opponent refused to speak, he would have to change his approach entirely. The swordsman's eyes widened slightly at the implication behind his word. Both fighters clashed again in a blinding burst of light, weapons colliding with tremendous force. Kang-min continued pressing his point about altering the way they communicated through combat instead of word. A stone marker stood cracked and worn on the tiled ground, inscribed with old characters. A voice threatened that if the silence continued, consequences would follow. The swordsman crouched defensively, deflecting a strike as broken pieces of the stone marker scattered around him. Confusion and alarm crossed his face as the situation spiraled toward something far more dangerous than expected. Watching through the camera lens, the director questioned whether the shattered stone marker had been a prop, genuinely startled by how real it looked. A crew member clarified that it was solid granite, and the director marveled at the incredible realism captured on film. Kang-min's expression darkened as he asked himself what could be done next. uncertainty flickering behind his usual confidence. The weight of the unfolding situation pressed down on him. The swordsman raised his weapon, muttering that people nearby were beginning to notice something strange about their behavior. His silence afterward carried unspoken tension. Walking calmly across the courtyard with his sword in hand, Kang-min noted aloud that his opponent still refused to speak, even while standing on the edge of being exposed. His tone carried quiet amusement at the stubbornness. He swung his blade through the air, wondering whether the silence stemmed from fear of listening ears nearby. The motion sliced cleanly through the boom microphone's cable above them. Sparks crackled from the severed wire dangling overhead as the boom operator suddenly realized he could no longer hear anything. Confused, he turned to a woman standing beside him, who told him flatly to go get his ears checked. Pinned down, with one hand gripping the man's hair, the tattooed swordsman demanded to know why Kang-min kept pushing the confrontation this far. Surprise flickered across his face as he registered the persistence behind the question. Standing over the kneeling figure, he insisted that his own question deserved an answer first, refusing to let the moment slip past. Unresolved, rain poured down around them as the standoff continued. Offset, a young woman watched the scene unfold, letting out a soft sound of amazement at what she was witnessing. The performance had clearly captured her attention completely. Sparks and light exploded across the courtyard as blades clashed with tremendous force, dazzling everyone watching from behind the cameras. Someone remarked that the production team had spared no expense on the visual effect. Mid-strike, the swordsman warned that revealing himself publicly would create serious trouble, questioning why Kang-min would risk exposing them both this way. His blade cut through the air as he pressed the point. Kang-min lowered his head slightly, brushing off the danger as insignificant compared to what someone of his own fame regularly handled. His tone carried quiet confidence despite the chaos surrounding them. He continued, pointing out that with his level of recognition, his opponent could have walked away from this life long ago. The observation carried more weight than a simple compliment. Their blades locked together as he pushed further, asking directly why the other man continued killing people despite having every reason to stop. The question hung heavily between the clashing swords. A blood-streaked kitchen appeared in memory, distant from the fight. A voice recalled losing far too much blood, the words drifting from somewhere in the past. A woman lay collapsed on the floor, tears mixing with blood as she whispered that she truly believed she was going to die. Her voice carried quiet resignation rather than panic. From her position on the ground, she asked why the violence had come so suddenly, directing the question toward the figure standing over her. Blood pooled beneath her as she struggled to understand. A man stood nearby. Blood splattered across his shirt, staring blankly ahead as he murmured a name under his breath. Recognition and something deeper passed behind his eyes. Tears mixed with blood as they traced down her face. She admitted that she had simply been curious. The confession felt heavier than any accusation could have been. Still lying on the floor, she wondered aloud whether she could ever have understood the emotion he claimed to feel for her, calling it love. Even as her strength faded, the words came slowly and brokenly. His eyes narrowed as he explained that if she had never intruded into his home and witnessed what she wasn't meant to see, none of this violence would have occurred. He called the situation unfortunate, his tone eerily calm. Blood traced from the corner of her mouth as understanding settled over her. She murmured quietly that this explained everything that had happened. The realization brought no comfort, only clarity. Her gaze lifted slightly, filled with something between pity and sorrow, as she told him how pitiful he truly was. Confusion crossed his expression at the unexpected response. Standing over her still form, he reflected on how strange it felt to remain alive and breathing, surrounded by the warmth of others, yet unable to feel anything himself. Blood pooled steadily beneath her as her breathing grew shallow. She managed one final thought, questioning whether the emptiness he described was essentially no different from being dead already. Blood trickled from her lips as her eyes lost focus. Her body went still on the blood-stained floor, the life fading completely from her expression. The man slowly turned away, his blood-streaked shirt a quiet testament to what had occurred, leaving the scene behind without a voice questioned whether the inability to feel emotions could truly be considered the same as being dead. The words carried genuine weight, pressing against something the man had never allowed himself to examine closely. He stood frozen in the darkness, the question catching him off guard completely. His mind drifted backward, recalling an old memory where he had once described an actor as simply someone who performs emotions for others to see. An older man's face appeared in memory, explaining that understanding a character's feelings meant becoming immersed in them completely, expressing those emotions until they felt indistinguishable from something real and personal. Blood stained his collar as he stood in the present moment, admitting quietly to himself that he felt alive. The confession carried unsettling clarity, contrasting sharply with everything he had claimed not to feel. Memory shifted again to an older man extending a business card, asking if he had ever considered pursuing acting as a career. The offer had planted a seed that grew into something far darker than intended. On a hazy film set, crew members complained about dust obscuring their view, unable to see the actors performing somewhere within the haze, confusion mixed with mild frustration among the waiting staff. The director erupted with excitement, praising the swirling dust as a perfect visual metaphor for crumbling royal authority. He declared the shot worthy of the highest artistic recognition, completely absorbed in his own vision. Within the story's world, the swordsman gripped his blade tightly, warning that drawing further attention to their conflict would create serious complication. His expression remained guarded as tension built around them. Kang-min's expression turned cold and commanding as he instructed the man to follow him without hesitation. Authority replaced his earlier playful demeanor entirely. They arrived at what appeared to be an armory, its weapon racks lined with polished spears. A guard explained that the area remained closed for repairs and was officially off-limits to visitors. The swordsman noted quietly that this meant no one would interrupt whatever conversation needed to happen. His tone suggested that the isolation had been chosen deliberately for this exact purpose. Kang tilted his head, asking directly what exactly that isolation was supposed to mean. Curiosity mixed with weariness as he studied his opponent's calm demeanor. A hand reached toward a door as a voice declared that moving forward, he would no longer face the other man as merely an actor performing a role. The statement carried unmistakable finality. Standing among the weapons, the swordsman clarified that this time he would confront Kang as a professional killer instead. The declaration settled heavily over the quiet armory. Kang questioned whether that claim held any real weight, his tone carrying quiet skepticism despite the seriousness of the moment. Steel gleamed faintly behind him in the dim light. He smiled faintly, crossing his blades before him and remarking that dying as an actor would have felt somewhat more honorable than whatever fate awaited him now. Dark humor masked whatever tension lay beneath the surface. The swordsman observed that Kang still maintained his composure despite everything unfolding around him, clearly unsettled by how unaffected his opponent appeared to be. Kang-min's eye narrowed sharply as he admitted plainly that he was genuinely curious about what would happen next. Something predatory flickered behind his otherwise calm expression. The swordsman lunged forward with his weapon extended, warning that Kang-min would soon wear an entirely different expression once the moment truly arrived. Steel closed the distance between them rapidly, promising violence neither man intended to hold back from. Waves crashed against the hull of a small fishing boat drifting beneath a wide-open sky. The vessel rocked gently on quiet water far from any coastline, carrying two passengers with fishing rods in hand. An older man with graying hair held his rod loosely, a faint smile crossing his face. He remarked that having a fishing companion made the outing far more enjoyable, his tone casual and warm. Beside him, Kang-min sat with his arms folded, his expression distant. He wondered quietly whether this was what it might feel like to have a son. Then he asked directly why they were even out there. The scene shifted to a memory. The old man stood in a dim forest clearing, holding out a business card marked Y Entertainment. He reminded Kang-min that he had accepted the offer and traveled all this way because of it. Back on the boat, the red and white bobber floated undisturbed on the surface. Kang-min pressed further, questioning what any of this had to do with learning to feel emotions. The old man posed a strange test. He asked whether Kang could convincingly act as though he desperately needed to relieve himself. Kang-min answered flatly that he had never experienced that kind of urgency, so naturally he could not fake it. The old man tilted his head, a knowing look settling over his face. He explained that emotions were not something invented on command. They were born from experience. His words continued over a wide shot of the open sky. Only someone who had truly felt desperation, he said, could ever portray it convincingly. Kang-min's expression remained unreadable as the old man's voice carried on. He told him to go out and experience many different things, promising that eventually a day would come when Kang would feel something real for the first time. A tight shot captured Kang-min's eye, sharp and searching. He repeated the idea under his breath, turning the concept over. Emotions gained through experience. Without warning, the bobber jerked violently beneath the surface. The old man shouted an alarm, urging Kang-min to reel it in quickly before the catch got away. Kang-min gripped the rod stiffly, clearly unfamiliar with the motion. The old man grabbed hold beside him, exasperated, asking if this was truly his first time fishing before demanding that he pull harder. Confusion turned to frustration as the old man corrected him again, insisting that he was reeling in the wrong direction entirely. Kang-min, still stone-faced, simply asked if this new attempt was any better. Moments later, a fish dangled from the line, flopping weakly in the sea air. Kang-min studied it up close, his brow furrowing slightly as he asked whether they always looked this unpleasant. The old man turned to him with a knowing grin. Waiting, he asked simply, "Well, what did you think?" A close-up lingered on Kang-min's face, his eyes narrowing with quiet intensity. He turned the earlier question back on himself, wondering exactly what emotion he was feeling in that moment. The scene cut sharply to a room lined with spears and blades mounted along a wall. A voice murmured a single thought, uncertain and searching. Then an eye snapped open, catching sight of something urgent. A masked figure lunged forward, blade extended toward Kang-min's throat in the middle of a violent confrontation. A voice echoed through the moment, asking what expression would cross his face the instant death arrived. Steel met steel in a blinding clash of sparks. Kang-min twisted his body, forcing his blade upward to intercept the strike aimed directly at him. The impact sent a shockwave through the corridor. With their blades locked, Kang-min's expression hardened beneath the crossed swords. He repeated the word under his breath, almost as a challenge to himself. Emotion. The question from the fishing boat and the question in the middle of battle merged into one, leaving him searching for an answer he had never needed before. His opponent pressed a blade against Kang-min's arm, drawing a thin line of blood. Through gritted resolve, Kang-min admitted that his true purpose had never been conquest or revenge. He simply wanted to understand something that had always eluded him. Steel clashed against steel as the fight resumed in full force. Kang-min spoke of the thing every ordinary person supposedly carried inside them without effort. Emotion. That word remained a mystery he had spent years chasing. A blade came down with tremendous force, cracking the floor beneath it. His opponent barely dodged, rolling clear as the weapon split the tile where he had stood a heartbeat earlier. Locked in another exchange, Kang-min explained how far he had gone in his search. He had been willing to attempt reckless, even absurd methods, all in pursuit of that single answer. Eventually, that pursuit led him to take up acting as a profession. Blades flashed rapidly across the room as multiple fighters clashed in a blur of motion. Sparks and steel filled the corridor while both sides pushed forward without hesitation. His opponent, breathing hard and bloodied, studied Kang-min's face closely. A quiet realization began to form as he understood the reasoning behind everything Kang-min had revealed. Stunned, he repeated the words back in disbelief. "You actually became an actor?" He could barely reconcile the hardened killer before him with someone who had pursued a career in acting simply to understand human emotion. A tense pause followed as fingers tightened around a blade hilt. The weight of that revelation settled heavily over the moment. Kang-min's opponent raised his weapon overhead, forcing another clash directly above him. He remarked coldly on Kang-min's plan, calling it painfully predictable and unoriginal. Sparks scattered as their blades met again in rapid succession. Kang-min's rival pushed through the exchange, muttering about the astonishing nature of what he was witnessing, his voice trailing into disbelief. Standing above him, he studied Kang-min with a mixture of awe and mockery. He compared what he was seeing to something worthy of the highest recognition, sarcastically suggesting it belonged among Nobel Prize achievements. Leaning closer with their blades still crossed, he questioned whether something in Kang-min's mind simply worked differently from everyone else's. His smile carried both amusement and unease. He continued, remarking that Kang-min's reflexes rivaled those of history's greatest minds. The comparison was clearly not meant kindly, but rather as a comment on how unnatural his abilities were. Both fighters clashed again in a tight, controlled exchange. Despite the intensity, his opponent admitted that something about the entire situation still did not sit right with him. Rain began falling across the rooftop as Kang-min stood firm with his sword drawn. His rival pieced together the timeline aloud, suggesting that Kang-min's decision to become an actor had been a calculated method for understanding human emotion. The fight escalated into a furious storm of strikes and counters. Between clashes, his opponent demanded to know why Kang-min had killed a man named Kim Yong-soo, the very benefactor who had helped guide him into the world of acting. The scene shifted into a grainy, faded memory. The details were barely visible. A single word echoed through the haze: experience. The word lingered as though it explained everything and nothing at once. Kang-min moved with sharp precision, weapon raised as rain streamed around him. A declaration rang out, stating plainly that emotions could only be felt through lived experience. Nothing else could substitute for it. He surged forward, both blades extended wide as light exploded around him. The single word flashed again: experience. It drove home the same idea that had shaped his entire journey. In a final decisive clash, Kang-min crossed his swords and unleashed a powerful strike against his opponent. Behind him, a shadowed figure lunged closer with a weapon poised, pushing the fight toward its most dangerous point yet. A voice behind him asked a single sharp, unfinished question. He kept his back turned, a wooden sword resting against his shoulder. Long hair fell loose around his masked face as he began to answer, his voice quiet but certain. "That's why." His hand trembled at his side, blood dripping steadily from his fingers onto the floor. The weight of what he had done settled into his words. "I had to kill him." The scene shifted to a modern room. dark and closed off from the outside world. A bloodied hand pressed against a notebook, leaving crimson streaks across the page. Nearby, an old man coughed violently, blood spilling from his mouth, as a woman knelt beside him. The old man lifted his head, gray hair damp with sweat, and his chin smeared red. Confusion and pain twisted across his expression as he forced out the question, "Why on earth? Why would you do this?" A younger man in a dark suit looked down without flinching. His long hair partly veiled his face, and his tone carried no hesitation. "Didn't you teach me yourself?" His voice remained flat and deliberate as he explained the purpose behind his actions. What he needed to accomplish was simple in words, but heavy in meaning: to feel and understand emotions. A notebook lay open, its pages soaked in blood. Written across it was a single phrase marking the turning point. Scene #42, usurpation. The old man reached toward the notebook with a shaking hand, recognizing the truth written there. His disciple had killed his own father. Upon realizing this, the disciple had poured every emotion he could find into the violent act, as though trying to experience the grief he had never truly known. A woman sat nearby, her long dark hair hiding most of her face. She spoke softly about that memory, recalling what the emotion had felt like in that moment. She admitted that she had wanted to experience it firsthand. Standing in a quiet room lined with bookshelves, the man in the suit continued speaking to the seated old man. His reasoning came from somewhere deeper than logic. To him, the old man had always been like a father. The setting darkened further, an empty desk and dim lighting framing the scene. Blood ran from the corner of a mouth as a single word slipped out. "So?" The old man's face filled with exhaustion and dread as he pressed further. His breath was uneven. He needed to know what came next. What emotion was the other man feeling at that very moment? A tense stillness followed. Neither man spoke. Then the answer came, stark and empty. A hollow face stared forward, unreadable. Nothing. The old man's eyes narrowed with a mixture of anger and sorrow, disappointment hardening his expression. Above him, the younger man spoke coldly. Pitiful. Then again, almost as if trying to convince himself, pitiful. A quiet sound echoed as something dropped between them. The younger man stood tall in the shadows, his faceless presence looming over the old man seated below. The scene returned to the traditional hall where the woman from before stood with her back turned once more. She admitted that she had believed this time would be different. Tears streaked down her face as she confessed the truth behind her efforts. She had desperately tried afterward to feel something real, but in the end, it had amounted to nothing more than hollow, superficial acting. Standing alone with her sword resting nearby, she asked the question that had haunted her from the beginning. "Why can't I feel anything?" Tears streaked down his face as he looked upon the scene before him, his expression heavy with pity. A quiet statement escaped him. "I feel sorry for you." A figure stood with her back turned, her long hair falling past her shoulders in the dim light. Only 2 words left her lips, carrying the weight of unanswered confusion. "Just why?" The masked man loomed in the shadows, his suit blending into the darkness around him. Looking down at the old man before him, he spoke with cold disdain. "You're pitiful." She remained motionless, her hair obscuring her face. The single word she uttered lingered in the silence. "Why?" A young man's eyes widened with alarm, his face pale beneath dark tousled hair. Beside him, another figure demanded an explanation, desperate and searching. "Why?" The corridor stretched long and empty, wooden doors lined in perfect symmetry beneath dim lighting. A shadow moved swiftly through the space, unseen but felt as tension built along the hallway. Suddenly the stillness broke apart. Doors splintered and debris scattered through the air as violent motion tore through the corridor. Rapid, overwhelming strikes consumed the hallway. Mid-motion, a fighter wielded her blade with practiced precision, her hair whipping behind her from the momentum. She addressed her opponent directly, her reasoning clear and pointed. "You're a contractor just like me." Sparks flew as another attacker rushed forward, blade drawn and ready to strike. He voiced his intent aloud, driven by the desperate hope that violence might finally let him feel something. The young man paused, brushing off the strange sensation crawling up his spine. Unsettled by the eerie atmosphere, he muttered under his breath before making an internal vow. "No matter the cost, I won't reveal a single true emotion to him." A blade sliced through the air with tremendous force, curving toward its target. The fighter with the ponytail braced herself, raising her weapon to meet the incoming strike. He launched himself backward through the air, twin blades gripped tightly in his hands. "What?" He narrowly avoided the attack meant to kill him. Landing hard on his feet, he reflected on how close he had come to death. Had he jumped even a moment later, the blade would have found its mark. The fight escalated as more debris exploded from the impact of their weapons. He twisted his body mid-air, dodging by a narrow margin as the ground beneath him cracked apart. Skidding across the shattered floor, he winced at the damage beneath his feet. "Damn, look at the floor." For a moment he seemed more concerned with the wreckage than the fight itself. Watching him move, the woman studied his face carefully. That expression, she recognized something significant in it, calling it an expression worth remembering and learning from. A blade reflected his face back at him, capturing every flicker of tension in his eyes. It was the look of someone staring death directly in the face, a contractor pushed to his limit. The masked man's gaze remained calm and unreadable despite the chaos. He asked directly what emotion was stirring inside his opponent at that very moment. Something shifted across the young man's face as the question lingered. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his features, subtle but present, hinting at an answer he had yet to speak. A wooden weapon shattered beneath the swordswoman's strike, fragments spinning through the air. Her eyes remained locked on her opponent, sharp and unwavering. Then confusion crossed her face. When did he? She hadn't anticipated the sudden movement. Their blades collided with tremendous force, sending shockwaves through the hall. Both fighters pushed against each other with everything they had, neither willing to yield. Wooden doors splintered from the impact, debris scattering across the floor. The young man stood amid the wreckage, running a hand through his hair as he wondered what to do next. She lay motionless on the ground, defeated after the brutal exchange. Standing over her, he dismissed the entire ordeal with a flat remark about emotions and the nonsense that had driven the fight. Blood dripped from her mouth as she forced herself to speak, her voice carrying dark humor despite her injuries. He told her plainly that whatever performance she had been putting on was over. The scene shifted to a grand palace bathed in daylight. Wooden beams and painted walls caught the sunlight, while a mural depicting mountains and a red sun stretched across one wall. He stirred awake, disoriented. "Where am I?" A figure addressed him directly. "You're finally awake." Nearby a blade rested over an open flame, its edge catching the firelight as it heated. He knelt before a throne, uncertain of the identity of the man seated there. Hesitantly, he asked, "Are you the crown prince?" Fire crackled beside them as tension built between the two men. The seated figure demanded to know why he had been brought there. A cigarette dangled from his lips as he spoke with casual indifference. "Tell me where the safe is." He clearly had no intention of wasting any more time. Silence stretched between them. Finally, the kneeling man answered, "No." The prince's hand reached toward the heated blade resting in the flames. He remarked that he had expected the refusal and had prepared accordingly. A close view of his eye revealed calculation and quiet menace. He continued, explaining that he had anticipated the other man putting up a tough front. Steam rose from the blade as he lifted it from the fire, its surface glowing with heat. "I knew you'd put up a tough front." He looked at the heated weapon with satisfaction. "I made sure to heat this up properly." Descending the palace stairs with the blade in hand, he approached the throne with deliberate steps. His tone sharpened as he asked whether the other man really believed he could be intimidated so easily. Smoke curled from his cigarette as the heated blade pressed against his skin, yet his expression barely changed. "Did you really think this would work, just because I lack emotions?" The prince's composure cracked. He was clearly caught off guard, remembering that the other man had claimed he would learn through experience. "What?" A sudden strike caught the prince by surprise. As the blow landed, the man gave a single explanation. "Experience." A man's face twisted in agony as his scream tore through the room, blood streaking across his features. A cigarette burned between calm fingers as a cold voice questioned his reaction. Was that scream fear, or just a natural response to pain? Smoke curled upward as he lowered his gaze, remaining unmoved by the suffering before him. A blade caught the light beside his face, its edge steady in his grip. The angel dropped to his knees before the director, his face filled with fear as he furiously vowed to tear the crazy extra apart. He begged for only 5 minutes, promising to turn the stone ranking marker into the extra's tombstone. The director sat in his chair listening to the rant with little reaction. Suddenly, Dangers looked up and shouted in frustration, demanding to know where the director was and what he was doing. The director silenced him with a dark expression and questioned whether he understood the meaning behind the sound they had just heard. Dangers looked confused. To him, it was simply the sound of one extra destroying their luxurious set. The director began laughing intensely. He insisted that the noise was something far greater, the sound of Shakespeare himself weeping in heaven as a masterpiece was born. A worker pointed out that they weren't even filming yet. The director laughed again, telling him that he still had much to learn. He then pointed toward the sky, drawing everyone's attention to a camera drone hovering above them. The workers immediately became impressed, praising the director's foresight. Pleased with himself, the director corrected them, declaring that they should think of him as the Christopher Nolan of Korea. Suddenly, a female worker looked down at a bag and froze. Their actual drone was sitting right there. The director and the workers stared at each other in shock. If their drone was still inside the bag, then whose drone was recording them from above? The question hung unanswered in the air. The scene shifted back to the fight. Kang-min faced his opponent and acknowledged his stubbornness. Despite all the pain, The man could scream loudly enough, yet he still refused to reveal a single word. Baek Ji-hun sat restrained on a chair, his body badly burned and pierced as smoke rose from the heated wounds. Kang-min stood before him with his bloodied sword, explaining that all Baek Ji-hun had to do was reveal where the safe was and what could possibly be inside it that made him willing to endure being burned alive. Kang-min looked disappointed. This was his first task in his new job, and he couldn't afford to fail. A strange string of coded characters appeared briefly. Baek Ji-hun, barely able to keep his eyes open, still refused to reveal anything about the safe, no matter what Kang-min did to him. Kang-min looked surprised by his sudden determination. For a moment, Baek Ji-hun looked exactly like the protagonist of a story. He even remarked that considering Baek Ji-hun was an actor, everything he did naturally looked like a performance. Baek Ji-hun fell silent. Then he turned the observation back on Kang-min. From the moment they first met, he had noticed that Kang-min's tone, expressions, and every small gesture felt deliberately performed. It was almost as though Kang-min were constantly wearing a mask. Kang-min froze. The words dragged him into a memory from childhood. A bloody floor filled the room as young Kang-min crouched alone, terrified. His eyes were wide with fear, his clothes and hands stained. Then someone placed a hand gently on his shoulder. His parents appeared and embraced him, reassuring him that everything was all right and comforting him as their son. The warmth of the memory overwhelmed him. Tears spilled from his eyes. The scene returned to the present. Kang-min stood with his back turned as Baek Ji-hun continued studying him. Unlike himself, Baek Ji-hun believed Kang-min wasn't incapable of feeling emotions. That raised a more important question. Why was Kang-min hiding behind a mask? Kang-min's expression hardened. Baek Ji-hun recognized the look immediately. It was fear. He pressed further, wondering what Kang-min could possibly be so afraid of that he had chosen to live behind that mask. Silence settled between them. Kang-min turned and began walking toward the ladder. He admitted that Baek Ji-hun was right. He was terrified. More than death, more than being alone. His grip tightened around his sword as he continued. What frightened him most was the possibility that one day the mask would finally come off, and that he would lose himself along with it. The scene shifted to the blue sky. In a narrow passage, the director and a worker rushed toward the armory where Kang-min and Baek Ji-hun were fighting. The director carried a camera and urged the worker to hurry. He wanted every moment between the two captured vividly with a handheld technique. The worker, carrying a microphone, excitedly declared that the director was destined to win the grand prize at this year's Blue Dragon Film Awards. As they approached the gate, the director became absorbed in the scene's imagery, describing the protagonist's burning rage and the fire consuming his surroundings. Then they saw it. The palace was engulfed in crimson flames. Both men stared in shock. Nearby, a drone continued recording everything from above. The scene shifted to a mobile phone. Part 3 watched the news report as the broadcast announced that actor Baek Ji-hun had been hospitalized in intensive care after a fire broke out during the filming. She stared at the footage in disbelief. What was supposed to be a historical drama had somehow turned into a full-scale disaster movie. Lying in the hospital bed, Heart 3 looked at her phone and asked Kang-min about the missing footage. She couldn't understand how all the recorded material had disappeared. Kang-min calmly explained that the missing footage had captured all of his actions as the extra, Ryu Kang-min. Since Heart 3 had apparently watched everything through the drone, he assumed she already knew what had happened. Heart 3 looked confused. A drone? She asked which drone he was talking about. Kang-min clarified that he meant the filming drone and asked whether she had launched it to support him. Heart 3 hesitated before denying it. She hadn't launched any drone. Kang-min's expression changed. If it hadn't been hers, then whose drone had been recording them? He turned toward the window, sensing another presence, and his eyes narrowed. The answer was obvious. Someone else owned that drone. A drone appeared outside the window. Pilgang Traditional Tea House, Ixyeondong. Kang-min took a sip of tea before remarking on the unusual way Network had chosen to summon him. He set the cup down and acknowledged that they were certainly living up to their name. Across from him sat the scouter. The scouter calmly pointed out that Kang-min had created quite a spectacle, just as expected. He recalled how Kang-min had displayed his abilities in front of cameras and civilians before burning down the entire set. Kang-min treated the whole thing lightly, suggesting that if the scouter had enjoyed the show so much, he could at least pay an admission fee. The scouter narrowed his eyes. Had Kang-min actually completed the mission, he would have gladly paid. The assignment had been simple: retrieve a single item, specifically Batala's Spade A. Because of that, the expectations had been high, and the scouter admitted that he had been deeply disappointed with the result. As the scouter reached for his tea, something caught his attention. Kang-min calmly revealed that he had, in fact, brought the item. A blue crystal cube sat with Kang-min, its surface giving off an unusual glow. The scouter picked it up and acknowledged that Kang-min had indeed completed the retrieval. apologizing for doubting him. He then asked whether the previous owner had handed it over willingly. Kang-min refused to reveal the details, keeping the circumstances to himself. The scouter accepted the answer and admitted that he had nearly underestimated Kang-min. Kang-min grinned and suggested that if the scouter was truly sorry, he could make up for it by buying him some shaved ice. Then Kang-min's expression became serious. He asked what the blue crystal actually was. Judging from the scouter's reaction, it clearly wasn't an ordinary jewel. The scouter admitted that he didn't know either. More importantly, he explained that neither he nor Kang-min needed to know. They simply followed the orders given from above. Kang-min considered that for a moment before wondering whether the appearance of these unexpected guests had also been ordered from above. A huge shadow appeared behind the door. Kang-min immediately sensed the thick stench of blood coming from behind him. A flash of blue light tore through the door as an attack ripped through the room. A bearded man carrying a red axe emerged. Kang-min casually dodged the attack while continuing to drink his tea. Rather than showing concern, he criticized the man's complete lack of tea house etiquette and joked that the group looked more like a tea and snacks club. The bearded man sighed, remarking that things could have been finished much more easily. His identification appeared. Network, affiliation, contractor name Woodcutter. A beautiful woman approached next. She smelled her own hand and seemed surprised by the lingering scent of blood despite having washed herself thoroughly. Her identification appeared. Network, affiliation, contractor name, Arium. A third figure emerged, dressed in dark clothing with his face concealed. He warned everyone not to stir up dust because the air was already difficult enough to breathe. His identification followed. Network, affiliation, contractor name, Null. Kang-min watched him dodge without even looking. Then a blonde-haired figure appeared and calmly praised Kang-min's remarkably sharp senses. His identification appeared. Network, affiliation, contractor name, Blind Shim. Kang-min looked across the group and realized they were all part of Network. The scouter confirmed it. These were specialized talents gathered for a particular purpose. They belonged to a special group known as 404. Kang-min questioned why people with such unusual abilities had been assembled in a place like this. The scouter explained that the reason was Kang-min himself. After observing how he had carried out his previous mission, Network had made its final decision. Kang-min was being assigned to 404. Kang-min looked displeased at the idea of being placed into a special group. To him, having a position handed to him simply because someone else decided he deserved it felt too much like nepotism. He had never liked having opportunities placed directly into his hands. The scouter looked confused by his reaction and simply asked what Kang-min intended to do about it. Kang-min answered that he would make his own place within the group. He tightened his grip around a fork. In the next instant, his wild energy surged. His crimson eyes sharpened as he vanished from his position and closed the distance toward Woodcutter, directing the fork straight at the axe wielder. With a cold, deadly expression, Kang-min made it clear that if he needed a place among them, he could simply create one himself. The narration introduced several elite specialized units from around the world. The UK's SAS was known as one of the pioneers of modern counterterrorism forces, while the US DEA specialized in combating drug trafficking and dismantling cartels. France's raid served as a national police unit focused on responding to violent threats. Just as the world had specialized organizations created for specific purposes, Network possessed its own specialized unit. This group was designed to handle situations that appeared impossible. Regardless of the methods required, they completed their missions flawlessly and thoroughly, operating unseen and leaving no trace behind. They were known as 404. The scene returned to the present. Kang-min made it clear that he intended to create his own position within the group rather than accept one that was simply handed to him. Woodcutter stared at him. Kang-min raised his fork toward Woodcutter's neck, making his intention obvious. Woodcutter immediately recognized the gesture as open defiance. He swung his axe and effortlessly snapped the fork in two. Kang-min stared at the broken fork in surprise. Woodcutter rested the handle of his axe against Kang-min's shoulder, seemingly amused by the rookie's bold attitude. Kang-min smirked as he tried to remove the handle, treating his behavior as nothing more than a natural attitude for someone new to the group. Woodcutter pressed down harder and criticized the younger generation for having no respect for hierarchy. Kang-min clearly didn't even understand the proper way to bow his head. The pressure forced Kang-min's legs through the floor. He struggled to pull himself free, shocked that his foot had become completely trapped. Woodcutter then asked whether Kang-min really came from Batala. He swung his axe toward him, explaining that the more impressive a young fighter was, the harder they were to control. He had no interest in dealing with troublesome people. Woodcutter poured his full strength into the next strike, tearing apart the floor. Arium watched in surprise as Kang-min seemingly went down instantly, yet he looked almost as comfortable as if he were lying in his own bedroom. The axe became lodged between Kang-min's legs. Kang-min grinned, explaining that Woodcutter's constant nagging had been so boring that he had almost fallen asleep. He freed his leg and sprang away, sarcastically thanking Woodcutter for releasing his foot before immediately kicking toward him and calling him an old geezer. Woodcutter blocked the kick with ease. He mocked Kang-min for becoming cocky so quickly before swinging his axe again. The massive strike tore through the wooden structure around them. Kang-min avoided the attack and quickly assessed Woodcutter's abilities. His strength was impressive, but his movements were noticeably slower. Kang-min wondered if his age was responsible. Woodcutter suddenly changed his stance. He explained that true power was speed. With tremendous force, he sent pieces of the shattered wooden structure flying toward Kang-min. Kang-min dodged the debris, but one piece caught on his shirt and dragged him against the wall. He immediately complained about his favorite outfit being ruined. Woodcutter told him not to worry about his clothes, implying that soon they would be the only thing left of him. He charged forward with his axe. Kang-min puffed out his cheeks and suddenly spat green powder directly into Woodcutter's face. A nearby open bowl of green tea revealed where he had prepared it. Woodcutter wiped the powder from his face, his disgust toward Kang-min growing by the second. The hooded Null was stunned that Kang-min had somehow prepared green tea powder in the middle of the fight. Woodcutter angrily condemned Kang-min for spitting in his face and then running away, but when he looked toward Kang-min's previous position, there was no one there. Kang-min had already slipped behind him. He picked up one of the broken wooden pieces and aimed it at Woodcutter's neck, pointing out that someone who intended to run away wouldn't have bothered taking a weapon with him. Woodcutter froze, realizing too late when Kang-min had moved. Before he could finish his reaction, Kang-min attacked. Wooden fragments struck Woodcutter from several directions, tearing apart his clothes and leaving pieces embedded across him. Kang-min stepped back and watched as Woodcutter recovered. The older man prepared himself for another attack, once again admitting that he hated dealing with troublesome opponents. He decided to end the fight quickly so he could finally take some annual leave. Kang-min also became serious. He drew his karambit and accepted that if Woodcutter intended to fight at full strength, he would have to respond in kind. Both men charged toward each other. Just as they were about to collide, the others rushed between them and forcibly stopped the fight. Blind Shim restrained both fighters and declared that they had gone far enough. The exchange had already been sufficient to serve as a test. Afterward, the blonde-haired man turned toward Kang-min and apologized for their earlier rudeness, addressing him respectfully as young master Kang-min. Kang-min found his manner so old-fashioned that he thought he sounded like someone straight out of a Muram webtoon. He then turned toward Woodcutter and acknowledged that the older man had worked hard as well. Woodcutter complained that he had been worked to the bone and was already exhausted from the ordeal. The blonde-haired man casually pointed out that Woodcutter had simply lost at rock, paper, scissors. Kang-min stared at them, increasingly bewildered by their behavior, and wondered if there was anyone in the group who was actually normal. As the room finally settled down, the scouter broke the silence. Now that everyone had calmed down, he said he would finally explain the real reason he had gathered them there. Kang-min immediately became curious about what he meant by the real reason. The scouter placed the blue crystal cube on the table and explained that everything concerned the very item Kang-min had retrieved. A few hours earlier, a close-up revealed Heart 3's sharp eyes as she examined the blue cube beneath a microscope. Kang-min stood nearby with his arms folded and asked what exactly they were looking at. After analyzing the object, Heart 3 initially identified it as an expensive synthetic gemstone. However, her expression quickly became more serious. That was only what it appeared to be on the surface. Kang-min immediately questioned whether its interior was different. Heart 3 pointed toward the computer and prepared to show him. She explained that the high-precision CT scanner would use X-rays to display the object's internal structure in 3 dimensions. The machine would consume quite a bit of electricity, so she casually asked whether he was willing to pay the cost. Kang-min told her to go ahead and suggested that she simply sell a couple of her outfits to cover the bill. Heart 3 pressed the red button, beginning the scan. Laser lights surrounded the blue cube as the machine analyzed it. Once the scan finished, the results appeared on the screen. Heart 3 pointed out that the interior was composed of multiple layers of electronic circuitry. Kang-min was stunned by the discovery. Realizing that the object contained actual electronic components, Heart 3 clarified that it was not merely a gemstone. The object was an artificial substance deliberately engineered for a specific function. A few days later, Busan Blanc Encore Hotel. Kang-min stood by the window looking out over the city. He found the view quite pleasant and noted that the network had gone as far as booking them a hotel like this simply for a business trip. Turning toward the woman behind him, he remarked that the benefits of being part of the network were surprisingly impressive. Ariam, however, was wrapped tightly in a blanket and was far from impressed. She complained that there was only one room. Network 404, contractor, Ryu Kang-min casually slipped a hand into his pocket and reminded her that they were a team. Ryu agreed that they were, but still felt they should simply book another room. Kang-min asked whether this was her first time sharing a room with a man. He then explained that he had already checked with the front desk, but every other room was fully booked. He opened a can of beer, and the crisp sound of it opening immediately caught his attention. He took a drink and enjoyed the refreshing fizz. Clothes were tossed onto the table as he settled in. Kang-min casually told Ryu not to worry about the situation, adding that he did not really see her as a woman in the first place. Ryu froze in shock. Kang-min took another drink and remarked on how crisp and fizzy the beer was. But Ryu remained fixated on what he had said about not seeing her as a woman. She was stunned that he could say something like that so casually. Kang-min looked at her in confusion, wondering what had suddenly gotten into her. Ryu slowly lowered the blanket. Her expression changed as she removed the hair tie holding her hair back. Looking toward Kang-min with growing confidence, she suggested that her dear junior clearly had no idea who he was dealing with. She moved closer, explaining that whenever she was alone in a room with a man, she became so worked up that she could barely hold herself back.